In the beginning, before the concept of time had settled upon the human mind, and long before the first stone was laid for the pyramids of Egypt or the ziggurats of Ur, there was only the Amazon. It stood then, as it stands in the deepest recesses of our imagination now, as a breathing, verdant lung of the world, a colossal biological engine shrouded in mist and mystery. To understand the story of the vine, we must first understand the canvas upon which its history was painted. Picture, if you will, a landscape so dense with life, so aggressively fertile, that the sunlight struggles to touch the forest floor. It is a world of perpetual twilight, where the sun filters down in rare, precious shafts of emerald and gold, illuminating floating dust motes that dance like spirits in the heavy, humid air. This is a place where geology and mythology are indistinguishable. Millions of years ago, the tectonic plates shifted. The Andes rose like the spine of a sleeping giant, and the flow of the continent reversed. An inland sea, trapped and churning, slowly transformed into a massive freshwater basin. As the waters receded, they left behind a sedimentary richness that would give birth to the greatest expression of life Earth has ever known. Here, in the damp silence of the primordial basin, the boundary between the earth and the water is fluid. The rivers do not merely run through the land, they define it, carving the clay and the silt into shifting, serpentine shapes that mirror the cosmos above. It is within this tangled green womb that our story begins. It does not begin with a chemist in a white coat, nor with an explorer wielding a machete and a map. It begins with a whisper passed between the spirits of plants in the era of deep mythology. The indigenous elders, the keepers of the oral flame, tell us that in this ancient time, the great anaconda, the mother of all waters, slithered down from the Milky Way. They say her massive body, heavy with the weight of creation, carved the winding rivers of the Amazon. Where she turned, the river bent. Where she rested, lakes formed. She is the Yakumama, the mother of water, and her legacy is written in the geometry of the basin. If one were to look down from the heavens, the Amazon river system looks exactly like a giant nerve cell, or indeed, a colossal snake, its tributaries branching out like capillaries to feed the living flesh of the forest. For thousands of years, this forest was a library, and the people of the upper Amazon were its librarians. But this was not a library of paper and ink, of dusty shelves and dewy decimals. It was a library of bark, root, leaf, and vine. The indigenous nations, the Tucano, the Shipibo, the Kamsa, and countless others whose names have been lost to the silence of history, did not read books. They read the wind. They read the behavior of the jaguar as it stalked through the undergrowth, its coat a pattern of shadow and light that mimicked the leaves themselves. They read the texture of the soil and the seasonal rising of the waters. In this era, the distinction between man, animal, and plant was porous, a veil so thin it could be brushed aside with a song. It is difficult for the modern mind, encased in concrete and governed by the ticking clock, to comprehend the intimacy of this relationship. To the first people of the Amazon, the forest was not a resource to be exploited. It was a society of persons. Some persons were human, walking on two legs. Others were four-legged, winged, or rooted in the earth. But all possessed a soul, an animacy that demanded respect and reciprocity. It is said that in this time the plants themselves spoke to the first curanderos, the healers, in their dreams. They revealed themselves not as mere flora, biologically inert and silent, but as conscious entities, ancient grandmothers and grandfathers waiting to teach. Imagine the life of an early hunter in this vast, green cathedral. Survival was a daily negotiation with forces far more powerful than himself. To navigate the dense foliage, to distinguish the nutritious fruit from the deadly poison, required more than just trial and error. It required a dialogue. The elders speak of a time when the plant teachers reached out to humanity, offering their bodies as keys to the locked doors of perception. Among these teachers, one stood apart, a woody, twisting climber that did not seek the sun in a straight line, but spiraled its way toward the canopy. This was Banisteriopsis caapi, the vine of the soul. The vine grew thick and twisted, often resembling the very snakes that slithered across the forest floor. It possessed a strength that allowed it to strangle mighty trees in its embrace, using them as a trellis to reach the light. To the uninitiated eye, it was just another tangle in a jungle of infinite tangles. But to the curandero, it was the master plant, the cord of the dead, the umbilical cord connecting the womb of the earth to the expanse of the spirit world. It waited there, in the humid shadows, for the moment when human hands would learn to harvest its wood, strip its bark, and boil it in water to unlock the gates of the unseen. But the vine alone was not enough. The mystery of ayahuasca is a mystery of botanical alchemy. The forest is home to over 80,000 species of higher plants. The mathematical probability of combining two specific plants, one containing a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, MAOI, and the other containing dimethyltryptamine, DMT, is statistically vanishing. And yet, somewhere in the deep mists of prehistory, this combination was discovered. The Banisteriopsis caapi vine contains the MAOI, which suppresses the enzymes in the human stomach that would normally destroy the DMT found in the leaves of the Psychotria viridis, or chacruna. Without the vine, the leaf is orally inactive. Without the leaf, the vine is merely a purgative and a mild sedative. But together? Together, they create a technological marvel of neurochemistry. How did this happen? How did a Neolithic people, without microscopes or knowledge of molecular chemistry, find the precise lock and key mechanism required to access this dimension? If you ask a scientist, they might murmur about trial and error, though the odds suggest such a process would take millions of years of random boiling. But if you ask the curandero, the answer is simple, whispered with the certainty of the sunrise. The plants told us, they say. The ants told us. The jaguar told us. Picture the first shaman, guided by intuition or perhaps by the desperate need to heal a dying child or save a starving tribe. He walks into the forest, fasting, his senses heightened by hunger and silence. He listens to the song of the forest. He feels the vibration of the caapi vine. He gathers the chacruna leaves, perhaps noticing the way the morning light catches their glossy surface, creating a halo of iridescence. He brings them back to the fire. The element of fire is crucial here. In the Amazonian cosmology, the cooking of the medicine is the transformation of the raw into the sacred. Picture the clay pot sitting over the smoldering logs. The water begins to bubble, turning a deep, muddy brown. The air fills with an acrid, earthy scent, the smell of boiling bark, of old wood, of soil. This is not a pleasant aroma. It is the scent of the jungle floor, heavy and potent. For hours, perhaps days, the mixture reduces. The shaman sings to the pot, whistling the ikaros, the sacred melodies that he believes imbue the liquid with structure and intent. He is not just cooking a soup, he is singing a spirit into existence. When the brew is finally ready, it is thick, bitter, and vile to the taste. It triggers a violent physical rejection, the purge. In the West, we view vomiting as a sign of illness, something to be suppressed. But in the logic of the forest, the purge is the first step of healing. It is the expulsion of mala energia, the physical and spiritual toxins that clog the human vessel. The vine demands cleanliness. It scours the body, emptying the stomach, preparing the temple for the visitor that is about to arrive. And then, the silence. The darkness of the Amazonian night is absolute. The canopy blocks the stars. The dense vegetation swallows the light. In this velvet blackness, the first effects begin to stir. It starts as a hum, a vibration that seems to come from within the ears, mimicking the sound of the cicadas outside. The body feels heavy, sinking into the earth, while the mind begins to detach. The little death has begun. Then, the visions. The indigenous descriptions of the ayahuasca experience are remarkably consistent across thousands of years and thousands of miles of rainforest. They speak of the arrival of the snake spirit. The great anaconda returns, not as a myth, but as a visual reality, winding its way through the drinker's vision in neon geometries, in patterns of blue and gold and green. The forest comes alive. The drinker sees the veins of the world, the bioluminescent network that connects the roots of the trees to the stars in the sky. This was the birth of Amazonian cosmology. The vine allowed the people to see the world as it truly was in their eyes, a place of infinite interconnection. They saw that the jaguar was not just a predator, but a spiritual gatekeeper. They saw that the river was not just water, but the blood of the earth. They saw the spirits of the deceased, not gone, but residing in a parallel dimension accessible through the vine. The ayahuasca ceremony became the central pillar of their society, the axis around which their culture revolved. It was their hospital, their church, their internet, and their history book. Through the vine, the elders could diagnose illness, locating the darts of sorcery or the intrusion of bad spirits in the patient's body. They could locate herds of peccary for the hunt, seeing through the eyes of the birds to scan the jungle floor. They could resolve conflicts, for in the vulnerability of the trance, the ego dissolves, and the petty grievances of the village seem insignificant against the vast, terrifying beauty of the cosmos. But the forest is not a place of pure benevolence. It is a place of duality. The jaguar protects, but it also kills. The river gives life, but it also drowns. The vine, too, holds this duality. It is known as la purga, the purge, but also la medicina, the medicine. It is a strict teacher. It forces the drinker to confront their own darkness, their own fears, their own mortality. There is no hiding from the vine. In the grip of the experience, one cannot look away. It strips the soul bare, removing the masks we wear in daily life, leaving us naked before the judgment of the universe. As the centuries rolled on, this knowledge deepened. The science of the Amazon grew complex. The healers developed strict protocols, the dieta. To learn from the plants, one had to become like a plant. This meant abstaining from salt, sugar, sex, and chaotic energy. The apprentice shaman would retreat into the forest for months, living in a small hut, eating only bland plantains and fish, drinking the juice of tobacco and the tea of the vine. In this state of sensory deprivation and biochemical alteration, the apprentice would download the songs of the plants. Each plant has an icaro, a specific melody that unlocks its power. The shaman builds a repertoire of these songs, a sonic pharmacy that he can call upon during the ceremony to guide the traveler through the storms of the vision. Imagine the discipline required for this. While the civilizations of Europe were building stone cathedrals and waging wars of conquest, the civilizations of the Amazon were mapping the geography of the human mind. They were exploring the inner space with the same rigor and bravery that navigators explore the outer seas. They discovered that the plant world is a hierarchy, a kingdom with its own politics and alliances. They learned that the ayahuasca vine is the mother, the benevolent but stern matriarch who oversees the operation, while other plants, like the toei, Brugmansia, are erratic and dangerous sorcerers, to be approached only with extreme caution. This era of solitude did not last forever, of course. The isolation of the Amazon is a geographical fact, but history has a way of piercing even the thickest canopy. But for thousands of years, this was the reality, a closed loop of spiritual ecology. The humans tended the forest, expanding the gardens of the sacred plants, spreading the vine from the foothills of the Andes to the mouth of the Atlantic. The forest, in turn, tended the humans, providing them with food, shelter, and the chemical keys to the divine. It is interesting to note that the name itself, ayahuasca, is Quechua, the language of the Inca. It translates roughly to vine of the soul or vine of the dead. Aya means spirit, ancestor, or dead person. Huasca means vine or rope. The implication is clear. This is the rope one uses to climb out of this life and into the next, and importantly, to climb back again. It implies a journey, a transit, It is not a drug that numbs reality. It is a vehicle that transports the traveler to a more real reality, a hyper-reality where the spirits are visible and the voice of nature is audible. In these early chapters of the human story, the great anaconda was not just a mythic figure from the past. She was a present reality, renewed every night in the ceremony. When the shaman drank the cup, he became the anaconda. He slithered through the astral plane. He shed his skin, renewing his power. This shape-shifting capability is a hallmark of Amazonian shamanism. The fluid identity of the shaman mirrors the fluid nature of the jungle itself, where a vine can strangle a tree, then become the tree, where a caterpillar melts into soup within a chrysalis to become a butterfly. Transformation is the only constant. We must also picture the setting of these ancient rites. They did not happen in clinics. They happened in the Maloka, the ancestral longhouse. These structures are themselves models of the universe, with the roof representing the sky and the posts representing the mountains. The ceremony is a communal event. The entire village might participate, or perhaps just the men or the elders, depending on the tribe. But the intent was always collective. The health of the individual was tied to the health of the community, and the health of the community was tied to the health of the forest. If the spirits were angry, the game would disappear. If the vine was not respected, sickness would strike. Thus, the consumption of ayahuasca was a diplomatic act. It was a treaty negotiation with the unseen forces that govern the world. The shaman was the diplomat, crossing the border into the spirit realm to bargain for rain, for healing, for luck.
Reports. Both updated sporadically. IPTV reaching version 1.2.3. OTT stuck at 0.0.2 since launch. The IPTV app? It delivers what it promises. Live channels stream consistently with occasional buffering. Interface matches SportsFire. Straightforward navigation. Works exclusively on streaming devices. Not compatible with phones or tablets. The OTT app presents problems. Minimal reviews, low downloads despite years available, vague descriptions. The business model? It makes no economic sense. Streaming services spend billions on licensing. An app claiming to aggregate that content for budget prices either revolutionized distribution or operates without authorization. Copyright law is clear. Unlicensed IPTV services commit primary infringement by copying content without consent. The Titan Streams case? 20-month sentences for operators. Users face prosecution under Fraud Act, up to 5 years and unlimited fines. ISPs monitor activity, police issue warnings, prosecution rates climb annually. Here's what complicates everything. Listen to what I discovered. There's a third entity called Streamfire Hosting, a completely separate, verified IPTV provider operating legally. They explicitly warn against non-verified services distributing content illegally. This creates perfect confusion. 3 Streamfire entities. 3. Vastly different legality statuses, users mixing information constantly. Domain analysis raises more concerns. Multiple Streamfire websites with varying legitimacy scores. Streamfireapp.tv shows medium risk. Streamfire.live recently registered with low trust. The official IPTV site stopped working, forcing download codes instead. Verifying legitimate sources? Nearly impossible. So here's the reality. The IPTV app accesses potentially unauthorized content through legally ambiguous infrastructure. You're probably not breaking laws using it, but the service exists outside traditional licensing. VPN protection essential. Channels might vanish when copyright holders enforce takedowns. The OTT app promises impossible economics. Legitimate content aggregation at these prices? It doesn't align with reality. Lack of reviews, minimal transparency, security concerns, all suggest extreme caution.
The breeze rustling the palm fronds carried news of the weather. The scent of the flowering datura carried warnings of danger, and in the center of it all, the winding woody vine of the capi waited, the master key to the library, holding the stories of the beginning of the world, ready to whisper them to anyone brave enough to drink the bitter cup. Long before the ships with their white sails appeared on the horizon, bringing crosses and swords and smallpox, the spiritual infrastructure of the Amazon was complete. The Internet of the forest was fully operational. The network of mycelium under the soil and the network of visions in the mind were mirrored reflections of each other. The great anaconda slept in the mud of the river, and she awoke in the minds of the people, night after night, in a cycle as eternal as the rising of the moon. This was the golden age of the shaman, a time when the boundaries of reality were soft and the gods walked or slithered among men. But as with all golden ages, the winds of change were gathering beyond the horizon. The isolation that had protected the green womb for millennia was about to be challenged. The vine, which had known only the reverence of the indigenous peoples, was about to encounter a new kind of Minda mind that sought not to commune with nature, but to conquer it. But let us not rush forward. Let us linger here for a moment longer in the damp, heavy air of the ancient forest. Let us sit by the fire of the first curandero, watching the smoke rise into the thatch of the maloca. Let us listen to the low, rhythmic whistling of the icaro and the sound of the rain beginning to fall on the leaves outside. In this moment, there is no time. There is only the vine, the breath of the forest, and the journey of the soul about to begin. The great anaconda opens her eyes, and the world begins to dream. The night deepens. The fire burns low, reducing to glowing embers that look like the eyes of jaguars in the dark. The brew is past. The bitter taste floods the mouth, a shock to the senses that signals the crossing of a threshold. The physical world begins to dissolve, edges blurring, sounds echoing with a metallic ring. The forest is no longer outside, it is inside. Vines grow from the fingertips, roots extend from the feet into the earth. The separation is over. The drinker is now the forest. This is the foundation upon which the entire history of ayahuasca rests. Every subsequent chapter, the arrival of the Jesuits, the brutality of the rubber boom, the syncretism of the Santo Daime churches, and the modern boom of spiritual tourism, is built upon this primordial bedrock. It is the story of a relationship between a primate and a plant, a relationship that has survived the rise and fall of empires. It is a testament to the enduring power of the organic over the synthetic, the ancient over the modern. As the vision takes hold, the linear progression of time collapses. The ancestors are present, sitting in the circle. The unborn are present, waiting in the stars. The great anaconda circles them all, her scales shimmering with the history of the world. This is the gift of the vine, the remembrance of things long forgotten. It is a return to the source, to the breath of the forest that breathed us all into existence. And in the quiet of the Amazonian night, under the canopy that obscures the sky, the story continues, whispered from leaf to leaf, from spirit to spirit, in a language that predates words. In the vast, verdant expanse of the Amazon basin, where the humidity hangs heavy like a curtain of velvet, and the air vibrates with the ceaseless thrum of a million unseen wings, there exists a mystery that science has only recently begun to unravel. To understand this mystery, we must first surrender our modern obsession with efficiency and speed. We must slow our breathing to match the rhythm of the trees. We must transport our minds back to a time before maps, before satellites, to a world where the forest was not merely a collection of trees, but a sentient, breathing entity, a green ocean of infinite depth and danger. Imagine, if you will, the sheer, staggering improbability of the discovery we are about to explore. The Amazon rainforest is the most biologically diverse container of life on our planet. It is a chaotic tapestry of botany, a riot of chlorophyll where over 80,000 known species of higher plants compete for sunlight and soil. In this dense, tangled web, every leaf tells a story, and every root holds a secret. But it is a perilous library. For every plant that heals, there is another that kills. There are saps that burn the skin like acid, berries that stop the heart in mid-beat, and flowers that lull the mind into a sleep from which there is no waking. To wander this botanical labyrinth without knowledge is to court death. Yet, somehow, amidst this infinite green ocean, the ancient peoples found the two specific keys required to unlock the ultimate door of perception. It is a discovery that stands as one of the greatest enigmas of ethnobotany, a botanical marriage that defies all statistical chance. If a human being were to systematically test every possible combination of two plants in the Amazon, tasting a new pair every day to see what happened, the process would take millions of years. Most combinations would do nothing. Many would make you sick. Some would kill you. The odds of stumbling upon this specific, synergistic pairing by random trial and error are so astronomically low that they are effectively zero. It is akin to a blindfolded man finding a single needle in a haystack the size of a continent. And yet, they found it. Consider the first component of this sacred union, the vine. Its scientific name is Banisteriopsis caapi, but to the forest dwellers, it is simply Ayahuasca, the vine of the soul, or the rope of the dead. It is a massive woody liana, a serpentine climber that twists and spirals its way up the giants of the rainforest, seeking the light of the canopy. It is ancient and gnarled, often as thick as a man's thigh, its bark rough and peeling, resembling the skin of a shedding reptile. It is the muscle of the mixture, the grounding force, the earth element. In the mythology of the tribes, the vine is often seen as masculine, a stern father figure or a warrior spirit. It carries the weight of the soil, the strength of the root, and the deep, rumbling vibration of the ground itself. On the other hand, we have the leaf. This is Psychotria viridis, known as chacruna. Compared to the mighty vine, it is humble, almost unassuming. It is a shrub belonging to the coffee family, with glossy, lance-shaped leaves that catch the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. It grows quietly in the understory, blending in with the thousands of other green shrubs. Yet, within its veins flows a chemical of profound potency. In the indigenous worldview, the leaf is often seen as feminine, the queen of the forest, the source of the light, the vision, and the celestial illumination. It is the sky element, the bringer of pictures, the opener of the third eye. Here lies the great paradox, the chemical riddle that protected the secret for millennia. Separately, these two plants are surprisingly inert when consumed orally. You could strip the bark of the Banisteriopsis vine, boil it, and drink it, and while you might feel a slight sedation or perhaps a rumble in the stomach, the heavens would not open. The same is true for the chacruna leaf. You could eat a salad bowl full of these leaves, rich as they are in the potent psychoactive compound dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, and nothing would happen. The digestive system would simply process them as food. This is because the human body is designed to protect itself. Our stomachs are guarded by an enzyme known as monoamine oxidase, or MAO. This enzyme acts as a biological gatekeeper, a sentry standing at the threshold of the bloodstream. Its job is to identify and neutralize foreign amines, breaking them down before they can reach the brain. DMT, the spirit molecule found in the leaf, is remarkably fragile in the presence of this enzyme. As soon as it enters the gut, the MAO enzyme attacks it, dismantling its chemical structure, rendering it harmless and inactive. The key is inserted into the lock, but the gatekeeper snaps it in half before it can turn. So, how did the ancient shamans learn to bypass this biological security system? How did they know that the rough bark of the vine contained the precise chemical inhibitor needed to distract the sentry? The vine, Banisteriopsis caapi, contains a specific class of alkaloids known as beta-carboline charmine, harmaline, and tetrahydroharmine. These are potent MAO inhibitors. When the vine is boiled and consumed, these chemicals temporarily shut down the production of the MAO enzyme in the human stomach. They essentially bribe the guard, or perhaps bind him, allowing the fragile DMT from the leaf to pass through the stomach lining, enter the bloodstream, and travel unimpeded to the brain. It is a mechanism of sophisticated pharmacology that rivals anything developed in a modern laboratory. It is a Trojan horse strategy. The vine shields the leaf, allowing the vision to enter the citadel of the mind. To believe that this was discovered by accident is to misunderstand the relationship between the indigenous people and their environment. The tribes of the Amazon do not view plants as objects. They view them as subjects, as teachers, as elders with their own voices and personalities. When anthropologists and ethnobotanists later asked the curanderos, "How did you know to combine these two plants out of the millions in the forest?" The answer was always the same. It was spoken not with pride, but with a humble matter-of-factness. "The plants told us," they said. Picture, if you will, the world through the eyes of an ancient healer. He does not walk through the forest, he moves within it, a part of its digestive tract. He possesses a form of sensory awareness that has atrophied in the modern human. He can smell the chemical signature of a root from 50 paces. He can taste the medicinal potential in the bitterness of a leaf. The indigenous lore suggests a form of synesthesia, where the chemical properties of plants are perceived as songs or vibrations. The Banisteriopsis vine hums with a low baritone frequency, a song of inhibition and grounding. The chacruna leaf sings a high crystalline melody, a song of light and vision. Perhaps, in a state of heightened sensitivity brought on by fasting, by isolation, or by the consumption of other minor plant teachers, a shaman heard these two melodies. He heard the low hum of the vine and the high trill of the leaf, and realized that they were not separate songs, but two parts of a harmony. They were a duet waiting to be sung. The vine was the bass line, the leaf was the soprano. Alone, they were incomplete. Together, they formed a symphony that could vibrate the very soul out of the body. This was the alchemical wedding of the Amazon. It was the marriage of earth and sky, of force and light, of the inhibitor and the catalyst. And the ceremony of this marriage is the brewing of the tea itself. Imagine the scene of the first brewing. It is likely night, for the Amazonian mysteries are children of the dark. A fire is kindled, not a roaring blaze, but a steady, controlled heat. The wood for the fire is chosen carefully, for even the fuel imparts its spirit to the brew. The water is drawn from a clean, flowing stream, water that has known the movement of the anaconda and the reflection of the moon. The shaman prepares the vine first. He takes the thick, woody stems of the ayahuasca and pounds them with a heavy wooden club. Thud, thud, thud. The sound echoes through the clearing, a rhythmic heartbeat. He smashes the fibers, opening the cell walls, exposing the inner flesh of the plant to the water. This is an act of violence, but also of love. It is the breaking open of the ego, the shattering of the shell to reach the kernel of truth. The shredded vine is layered into the bottom of a great clay pot, a nest of brown, fibrous snakes. Then come the leaves. The chacruna leaves are gathered at dawn, when the morning star is still visible, harvested with prayers and whispers. They are washed and placed atop the vine, layer upon layer, green upon brown, light upon dark. The pot is filled with water, and the long vigil begins. This is not a process of minutes, but of hours, often stretching into days. The mixture must boil and reduce and be refilled and reduce again. It is a process of concentration. The water evaporates, carrying away the non-essential, condensing the spirit of the plants into a thick, dark sludge. The shaman watches the pot, tending the fire, ensuring the heat is never too high, never too low. He sings to the brew. These are the ikaros, the magical songs that guide the spirit of the plant. He whistles into the steam, infusing his own breath, his own intent into the mixture. He is the catalyst, the priest officiating this botanical wedding. As the hours pass, the smell changes. It becomes heavy, earthy, pungent. It smells of molasses and old soil, of chocolate and sweat. It is a smell that triggers a primal memory in the brain, a scent of something older than civilization. The liquid darkens, turning a deep, viscous brown, sometimes shimmering with an oily, iridescent sheen on the surface. This is the gold of the Amazon. It is not a metal to be hoarded, it is a fluid to be shared. While this discovery was being made in the green silence of the Americas, the rest of the world was busy with its own advancements. In the deserts of Egypt, men were hauling limestone blocks to build pyramids, stone mountains designed to launch the pharaohs into the afterlife. In the valleys of Greece, philosophers were debating the nature of reality and the composition of the soul. In the mountains of the Himalayas, yogis were meditating in caves, seeking enlightenment through breath and silence. But here, in the basin of the world's greatest river, the indigenous people were building a different kind of monument. They were not building with stone or writing with ink. They were building a cathedral of the mind. They were developing a technology of the sacred that did not require mortar or chisel. Their pyramid was liquid. Their scripture was chemical. They understood that the true temple is the human body, and the true altar is the human consciousness. While the Egyptians mummified the dead to preserve them for the future, the Amazonians drank the vine to visit the dead in the present. The resulting brew, once cooled and decanted, is perhaps the most complex pharmacological substance known to man. It is a mud-brown, bitter tea that tastes of bile and earth. It is difficult to swallow. The body recoils from it. The taste is often described as the taste of the jungle itself: rotting vegetation, wet earth, vibrant life, and decaying death, all distilled into a single cup. It is a taste that commands respect. You do not sip ayahuasca, you accept it. When the cup is finally drunk, the synergy begins. The vine moves first. The beta-carbolines saturate the stomach lining, disarming the enzymatic guards. A warmth spreads through the belly, a heavy, grounding sensation. The drinker may feel the roots of the vine growing down through their legs, anchoring them to the earth. The heartbeat slows. The breath deepens. The body becomes heavy, like a stone sinking into a river. This is the embrace of the mother, holding the child steady. Then, the leaf enters. The DMT, protected by the vine, crosses the blood-brain barrier. It fits into the serotonin receptors of the brain like a key sliding into a well-oiled lock. And the door swings open. The alchemical wedding is consummated in the theater of the mind. The darkness behind the closed eyelids begins to teem with activity. At first, it is subtle, a geometric pattern, a flash of color, a sense of presence. But then, the floodgates open. The synergy of the two plants creates a state of hyper-coherence. The visual cortex lights up, flooded with imagery that is brighter, sharper, and more real than the waking world. The indigenous descriptions of this state are remarkably consistent. They speak of leaving the body. They speak of climbing the vine, the axis mundito, the celestial realms. They speak of visiting cities of light, built of crystal and gold, inhabited by beings of immense intelligence. They speak of seeing the machinery of the universe, the interlocking gears of energy that drive the growth of a flower and the rotation of a galaxy. This was the gift of the marriage, access to the invisible. Through this brew, the shaman became a traveler of the multiverse. He could shrink down to the size of an ant and explore the roots of a tree. He could expand to the size of a condor and view the river from the clouds. He could travel back in time to the birth of his ancestors or forward to see the potential paths of the future. But it was not just for sightseeing. This technology was functional. It was medical. In this heightened state, the shaman could see illness. A tumor might appear as a black knot of energy. Depression might appear as a gray cloud hovering over the heart. Jealousy might look like a hook embedded in the liver. With the aid of the plant spirits, the shaman could perform surgery on the soul. He could suck out the poison, cut the cords of attachment, and blow soothing smoke into the spiritual wounds. The synergy of leaf and vine taught the people that there is no separation between the physical and the spiritual. The stomachache is connected to the argument with the brother. The fever is connected to the disrespect shown to the river. The plants revealed a holistic universe where everything is woven together in a web of cause and effect. And so the alchemical wedding was not just a one-time event in history. It is a wedding that is reenacted every night in the Amazon. Every time a pot is put on the fire, the marriage vows are renewed. The vine offers its strength. The leaf offers its light. The masculine and the feminine dance together in the bubbling water. It is a humbling thought to consider the genius required to create this mixture. Modern pharmaceutical companies spend billions of dollars and decades of research to develop a single drug that targets a single receptor. The unlettered people of the rainforest, armed only with their intuition and their relationship with the natural world, developed a complex, multi-plant delivery system that regulates neurotransmitters, unlocks subconscious memories, and facilitates profound psychological healing. They did this thousands of years ago, using clay pots and firewood. This chapter of history challenges our definitions of civilization and science. We tend to measure progress by the height of our skyscrapers and the speed of our microchips, but the story of the vine suggests there are other metrics. Perhaps true progress is the depth of our connection to the natural world. Perhaps true science is the ability to listen so closely to the earth that the plants themselves begin to speak. As we leave the fire of the ancient discovery and move forward in time, we must carry this image with us. The bubbling pot, the dark liquid, and the two plants intertwining in the steam. It is a symbol of partnership, not just between two botanical species, but between humanity and nature. It is a reminder that we are not alone on this planet. We are surrounded by teachers, by healers, by ancient grandmothers and grandfathers rooted in the soil, waiting for us to ask the right questions, waiting for us to learn the song that unlocks the door. The wedding is complete. The brew is ready. The cup is passed. And the door, which has been shut for so long, begins to creak open, revealing the light that has always been shining on the other side. While the stone legions of Rome marched across the paved roads of Europe, and while the great dynasties of China built walls to hold back the wind of the steppes, a different kind of civilization was thriving in the heart of the Amazon. It was a civilization not of stone and iron, but of wood, leaf, and spirit. As empires rose and fell in distant lands, crumbling into dust and memory, the rhythm of the rainforest remained unchanged, a perpetual cycle governed not by the edicts of emperors, but by the phases of the moon and the timing of the ceremony. The forest does not measure time in years, but in the slow, rhythmic breathing of the ecosystem. And for the people of the upper Amazon, the heartbeat of this existence was the ritual. We must cast aside our modern understanding of a ceremony as a mere symbolic gesture or a social gathering. To the indigenous mind, the Ayahuasca ceremony was, and remains, a matter of life and death. It was not recreational. There was no concept of tripping for pleasure. It was a grave, terrified, and sacred medical procedure for the soul. It was the moment when the community voluntarily entered the mouth of the jaguar to be digested and reborn. Picture, if you will, the setting of this nightly descent. We find ourselves standing before a maloka, the ancestral longhouse that serves as the spiritual anchor of the village. It is a masterpiece of organic architecture, a vast, conical structure thatched with woven palm fronds that reach almost to the ground. In the architectural cosmology of the tribe, the maloka is the universe itself. The tall, central posts that hold up the roof are the mountains connecting earth to sky. The thatch is the skin of the world, and the dirt floor, packed hard by generations of bare feet, is the underworld, the womb of the earth. It is night. The sun has plunged beneath the horizon with the sudden dramatic speed of the tropics. The air is thick, a heavy blanket of humidity that carries the scent of damp earth, rotting fruit, and the musk of 1,000 hidden animals. The darkness is not the passive absence of light we know in our electric cities. It is an active, living presence. It presses against the skin. Outside the maloka, The jungle is a cacophony of sound. The cicadas scream like electric buzzsaws, a wall of high-frequency noise that never ceases. The frogs boom from the riverbanks. The distant, mournful cry of a howler monkey echoes through the canopy, sounding like the wind blowing across the mouth of a giant bottle. This is the soundtrack of the primordial world, a chaotic symphony of survival that has been playing for millions of years. But inside the Maloka, there is a hush, a reverence. The villagers enter one by one, stooping low to pass through the small door, leaving their weapons, their tools, and their daily identities at the threshold. Inside, the darkness is absolute, save for a single small fire dying in the center, or perhaps the faint, glowing ember of a mapacho tobacco pipe floating in the blackness like a wandering star. The central figure in this theater of shadows is the curandero. He sits cross-legged on a woven mat, his posture upright and unmoving, blending into the gloom. He is the master of the threshold, the gatekeeper of the invisible. He is often an older man, his face etched with the lines of 1,000 nights spent in the spirit world, his eyes holding a depth that can be unsettling to behold. He is not a priest who recites dogma, he is a technician of the sacred. He has spent years in isolation, dieting on bland foods, abstaining from touch, learning the languages of the plants. He carries the heavy burden of his community's psychic health on his shoulders. Tonight, he is the captain of a ship about to set sail into a hurricane. The participants arrange themselves in a circle along the perimeter of the hut. They sit on mats or low wooden stools. There is a palpable tension in the air, a vibration of fear and anticipation. They know what is coming. They know that to be healed, they must first be dismantled. The ceremony is a confrontation with the self, and the self is a formidable opponent. The ritual begins with the preparation of the space. The curandero takes his mapacho, a roll of black, potent jungle tobacco, and lights it. He blows thick clouds of smoke over the pot containing the brew, over his ceremonial tools, the shakapa leaf rattle, the perfumes, the stones, and into the four corners of the room. The smoke is not recreational, it is a vehicle. In the Amazonian view, tobacco is a master plant that facilitates communication between worlds. The smoke carries the prayers of the shaman up to the spirits and creates a protective force field around the Maloka, sealing it against the chaotic, predatory energies of the forest night. Then, the brew is served. The curandero pours the dark, viscous liquid from a plastic bottle or an earthen jar into a small cup, often the bottom half of a hollowed-out gourd. He whispers a prayer, blowing smoke into the cup to bless the medicine, sealing his intent into the liquid. One by one, the participants are called up to the altar. Imagine the sensory intimacy of this moment. The room is pitch black. You cannot see the face of the man who hands you the cup, only the outline of his hand and the glow of his cigarette. You take the gourd. It feels light, organic, warm. You raise it to your lips. The smell hits you first, a pungent, acrid aroma that triggers a primal gag reflex. It smells of old wood, of boiled molasses, of something ancient and fermented. You drink. The taste is shocking. It is vile, intensely bitter, with a sour, metallic finish that coats the tongue and throat. It tastes of the earth itself, as if you have just swallowed a cup of liquid soil. It is a taste that the body naturally rejects, a biological barrier that demands commitment. You cannot drink ayahuasca casually. You must force it down, overcoming the body's resistance with the will of the mind. This is the first test. The medicine demands surrender before it has even entered the blood. You return to your mat. You sit. You wait. This period of waiting is perhaps the most psychologically demanding part of the ceremony. The Maloka is silent, save for the spitting of the dying fire and the breathing of the people around you. 30 minutes pass. 40 minutes. The mind begins to race. Doubts creep in. Did I take enough? Did I take too much? What if I go crazy? What if I never come back? The darkness seems to thicken. The sounds of the jungle outside seem to grow louder, morphing into strange, rhythmic whispers. Then, the medicine knocks. It often begins with a physical sensation. A warmth spreads through the stomach, a heaviness in the limbs. You may feel a slight nausea, a churning in the gut. The air pressure in the room seems to drop. A high-pitched ringing sound, the carrier wave, begins to whine in your ears, growing louder and louder, like the sound of a jet engine taking off inside your skull. The body feels different, alien, as if your skin is dissolving, melting into the mat, melting into the earth. It is at this precise moment, when the terror of the onset begins to peak, that the curandero begins to work. He picks up his shakapa, a fan made of dried leaves from the ohe tree, and begins to shake it. Ch-ch-ch-ch-ch. The sound is dry, rhythmic, like the sound of rain on a tin roof, or the sound of a rattlesnake's tail. And then he begins to whistle. The whistling is low at first, a haunting, melodic breath that seems to wander through the dark like a lonely bird. It is soft, almost imperceptible, mixing with the sounds of the insects. But slowly it gains strength. The whistle transforms into a hum, and the hum swells into a song. These are the icaros. To the uninitiated ear, the icaros might sound like simple, repetitive folk songs. But in the worldview of the ayahuasquero, they are highly sophisticated technological tools. They are not merely melodies, they are architectural blueprints made of sound. The shaman is not singing to entertain, he is singing to build a bridge over the abyss of the mind. The indigenous philosophy teaches that the universe is made of sound. The plants have songs, the rivers have songs, the stars have songs. When the drinker is in the chaotic, fluid state of the ayahuasca trance, they are adrift in a sea of pure energy. The icaro provides the boat. The rhythm of the shakapa acts as the metronome, the heartbeat that tethers the soul to the body, preventing it from drifting away into the void. The melody of the voice directs the visions, changing their color, their speed, and their emotional content. As the shaman sings, the visions erupt. The darkness behind the eyelids is no longer dark, it explodes into color. But these are not the random, chaotic hallucinations of a fever dream. They are structured, geometric, and impossibly intricate. The drinker sees vast, rotating mandalas of neon light, interlocking patterns that resemble the art of the Shipibo people, the Kene designs. These patterns are not merely decorative, they are perceived as the underlying code of reality, the source code of the biological world. You see snakes, endless, winding serpents made of light, slithering through the air, wrapping around your body. In the Western mind, the snake is a symbol of evil. In the Amazon, the snake is the mother. She is the DNA, the double helix, the bringer of life. She eats the drinker. This is a common experience, the sensation of being swallowed whole by a giant anaconda. It is terrifying, yes, but it is necessary. To be eaten is to be processed, to be taken inside the womb of the goddess, to be remade. And then comes the purge, la purga. In our sanitized modern world, vomiting is a sign of sickness, a shameful loss of control. In the ceremony, it is the main event. It is celebrated. The sound of retching echoes through the maloca, joining the chorus of the jungle bugs. But this is not ordinary vomiting. The drinker is not just expelling the contents of their stomach. They are expelling the contents of their life. The indigenous people believe that trauma, grief, anger, and jealousy are not abstract psychological concepts. They are physical energies that get stuck in the body. They are biles that rot the soul. The ayahuasca tracks these energies down like a hunter tracking prey. It scours the liver, the gut, the heart. It grabs hold of the repressed memory of a parent's death, the lingering shame of a childhood failure, the toxic residue of a bad relationship. It bundles them up and forces them out. When the purge comes, it feels like an exorcism. It is violent, heaving, and exhaustive. But the relief that follows is profound. As the toxin leaves the body, the vision clears. The dark, chaotic imagery gives way to light. The fear dissolves into a wash of gratitude. The drinker feels lighter, cleaner, hollowed out. The vessel has been scrubbed clean so that it may receive the light. In this state of purged clarity, under the guidance of the Icaros, the drinker begins to learn. The plants speak. They do not speak in English or Spanish, they speak in telepathic blocks of understanding. They show the drinker the truth of their own life. They show the interconnectedness of all things. This is the great revelation of the curandero's midnight lantern, the dissolution of the illusion of separation. In the cold light of day, we feel separate from the tree, separate from the river, separate from our neighbor. But in the glow of the visions, that boundary is revealed to be a lie. You look at your hand, and you see the bark of the tree. You look at the fire, and you see your own blood. You realize with a certainty that shatters the ego that you are not in the universe, you are the universe. You are the forest experiencing itself. The snake designs that fill the vision are not just hallucinations. They are recognized by the indigenous people as the microscopic structure of life itself. Long before the invention of the electron microscope, the Amazonian shamans were painting the double helix of DNA on their pottery and weaving it into their textiles. They saw the twisting, ladder-like structure of the molecule in their visions. They called it the stairway to heaven, the twisted vine, the great serpent. They understood that this geometry is the language of creation, the script in which the story of life is written. Throughout the long night, the curandero works tirelessly. He navigates the room, a shadow moving among shadows. He stops at each mat, performing a limpieza, or cleansing. He blows mapacho smoke over the crown of the drinker's head, into their hands and onto their back. He uses his shakapa to sweep the aura, brushing away the loose static of negative energy dislodged by the medicine. He sucks on the spot where the pain is concentrated, physically extracting the spiritual dart, and then coughs it out into the darkness. He is a doctor performing surgery in the dark, guided only by his inner sight and the lantern of the medicine. The emotional range of the ceremony is vast. There is weeping deep, guttural sobs of grief being released after decades of suppression. There is laughter cosmic, hysterical laughter at the absurdity of the human condition. There is terror, the primal fear of death and the unknown. And there is ecstasy, waves of bliss and love that feel like the warm embrace of a divine mother. The maloca becomes a pressure cooker of emotion, a crucible where the raw material of human suffering is transmuted into the gold of wisdom. As the night wears on, the intensity of the visions begins to fade. The carrier wave softens. The geometric patterns slow down and dissolve into the darkness. The exhausted participants lie back on their mats, wrapped in blankets, listening to the rain that has begun to fall on the thatch roof. The rain in the Amazon is not a drizzle. It is a deluge, a roar of water that washes the world clean. It feels like a benediction, a blessing from the sky to seal the work that has been done. The curandero smokes one last pipe. He sits in silence, watching over his flock as they drift into a natural sleep. He is the shepherd of the night, the guardian who has led them through the valley of the shadow of death and brought them safely to the other side. The lantern of his consciousness has burned bright while the world slept, holding the space, anchoring the light. Slowly, the sounds of the jungle begin to change. The nocturnal chorus fades, replaced by the chirping of waking birds. The black sky turns a deep, bruised purple, then a soft gray, then a vibrant, burning orange. Dawn breaks over the Amazon. The light filters through the cracks in the maloca walls, illuminating the faces of the people inside. They look different than they did the night before. Their faces are washed clean, open, vulnerable. They look like newborns. They sit up, stretching, making eye contact with one another. There is no need for words. The shared experience of the night has forged a bond deeper than language. They have traveled together to the end of the world and back. They have died, and they have been reborn. The ceremony is over, but the process has just begun. The insights gained in the darkness must now be integrated into the light of day. The midnight lantern of the curandero is extinguished, But a new light has been kindled inside the hearts of the participants. They step out of the maloca into the morning mist, breathing the cool, damp air of the forest. The trees look greener. The sky looks bluer. The world feels new because they are new. This was the rhythm of the Amazon for thousands of years. While the Romans built their aqueducts and the Egyptians wrapped their mummies, the peoples of the forest were engaging in this nightly technology of the soul. They were maintaining the spiritual hygiene of their society, ensuring that the connection between man and nature remained unbroken. They understood that the health of the individual is inseparable from the health of the whole, and that sometimes, to see the light, one must first be willing to sit in the absolute darkness. The isolation of the Amazon, that great green fortress of silence which had stood inviolate for millennia, could not last forever. For thousands of years, the basin had been a world unto itself, a biological island separated from the rest of the globe by the vastness of the oceans and the insurmountable wall of the Andes. But history is a fluid force, much like the rivers that carve the jungle floor, and by the 16th and 17th centuries, the currents of the outside world had begun to swirl violently against the edges of the forest. The veil was pierced not by the gentle probing of a root, but by the sharp prow of the caravel and the heavy boot of the conqueror. It was an era of maps. In the libraries of Lisbon, Madrid, and Rome, men with ink-stained fingers were drawing new lines across the blank spaces of the world. They filled the unknown with sea monsters and warnings, but also with the promise of gold, of spices, and of souls. It was this last commodity, the human soul, that brought the most determined invaders to the heart of the darkness. They were not soldiers of fortune, clad in armor and greed, but soldiers of God, clad in the black wool robes of the Jesuit order. Picture, if you will, the visual dissonance of their arrival. The Amazon is a world of vibrant, chaotic color, the neon blue of the morpho butterfly, the screaming scarlet of the macaw, the infinite, crushing green of the canopy. Into this riot of life walked the men in black. They carried with them the heavy weight of European dogma, a rigid, stone-hewn theology born in the cold cathedrals of the north. They carried wooden crosses, iron bells, and leather-bound books filled with Latin script. They were men of iron discipline, trained in the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, prepared to suffer and die to bring the light of Christ to the heathens of the New World. But the light they brought was a specific kind of light. It was the light of the Inquisition, the light of absolute truth, the light that casts no shadows. To the Jesuit mind, the world was a battlefield divided strictly between God and the devil. There was no middle ground. There was no space for the spirits of the river, the grandmothers of the plants, or the shape-shifting jaguars. There was only the church and the enemy. And as they pushed their canoes deeper into the winding, treacherous tributaries of the upper Amazon, sweating under the weight of their woolen habits, bitten by insects and plagued by fevers, they became convinced that they had entered the very stronghold of Satan. The jungle, to them, was not a paradise. It was a green hell. It was disordered, savage, and teeming with a sensuality that terrified the celibate mind. The very air felt heavy with sin. And then they encountered the ceremony. We must try to see this moment through their eyes. Imagine a Jesuit priest, Father Juan or Father Gabriel, stumbling upon a village clearing in the dead of night. He hears the rhythmic shaking of the leaf rattle, the shakapaw, which sounds to him like the rattling of dry bones. He smells the pungent, earthy smoke of the mapacho tobacco, which hangs in the damp air like a spectral fog. He creeps closer to the maloca and peers into the darkness. What he sees freezes the blood in his veins. He sees men and women retching, vomiting violently into the dirt. To the European mind of the 17th century, vomiting was not a therapeutic purge. It was a sign of demonic possession. It was the body rejecting the Holy Spirit, or the devil twisting the gut. He sees the people swaying, moaning, their eyes rolled back in their heads, lost in a trance that looks like madness. He hears the shaman whistling the Icaros, low, guttural melodies that do not follow the mathematical harmonies of a Gregorian chant, but rather the chaotic, sliding scales of the birds in the wind. To the missionary, this was not medicine. This was the witch's Sabbath. It was diabolical witchcraft. In his report sent back to the Vatican, written by candlelight with a trembling hand, he described the brew as a potion of the devil, a liquid designed to enslave the mind and allow the drinker to commune with familiar spirits in the guise of jaguars and snakes. He could not comprehend a spirituality that found God in the roots and the mud rather than in the sky. This was a clash of ontologies, a violent collision of two mutually exclusive worlds. The European god was a sky god, a distant, bearded father figure who dwelt in the heavens, separate from his creation. Salvation was an upward movement, a transcendence of the messy, biological earth. But the Amazonian Godor, rather, the Amazonian sacred, was imminent. It was down. It was in the dirt, in the vine, in the river, in the blood. Salvation was not about escaping the earth. It was about diving deeper into it. The Jesuits, fueled by a righteous terror, declared war on the vine. This was the era of the extirpation of idolatry, a systematic campaign to root out and destroy indigenous spiritual practices. They saw the shaman not as a doctor, but as a sorcerer, a rival priest serving a dark master. The instructions from the bishops were clear: destroy the tools of the devil. Picture the scene of this spiritual violence. It is a different kind of conquest than the bloody battles of the conquistadors, but it is no less brutal. The priests gather the villagers in the center of the clearing. They pile the ceremonial drums, the feather headdresses, the carved wooden stools, and the rattles into a heap. They bring out the pots used to boil the ayahuasca. And then, with a prayer on their lips, they set the pile on fire. The smoke of the burning instruments rises into the canopy, a dark offering to a jealous god. The villagers watch in silence, their faces masks of impassive grief. But the destruction did not stop at the artifacts. The priests went into the forest with machetes. They sought out the ancient patches of Banisteriopsis caapi. They hacked at the thick, woody vines, severing the devil's rope from its roots. They poured salt on the earth. They forbade the singing of the Icaros, replacing them with the Latin hymns of the Mass. The silence that fell over the missions was heavy and unnatural. The drums stopped beating. The whistling ceased. The people were herded into the church for morning Mass, forced to kneel on hard wooden planks, forced to eat the dry wafer of the Eucharist instead of the bitter tea of the forest. The missionaries believed they had won. They believed they had severed the connection between the savage and his demons. But they underestimated the vine. They did not understand the botany of the forest, nor the resilience of the culture that grew from it. You can cut a vine, yes. You can slash it to the ground. But Banisteriopsis caapi is a survivor. When you cut the main stem, the root system, deep and ancient under the soil, receives a signal. It is a signal of trauma, but also of renewal. The plant responds by sending up fresh shoots, not just one, but many. It grows back thicker, faster, and more tangled than before. The more you cut it, the more it proliferates. So it was with the practice. The ceremony did not die, it merely went underground. It retreated into the shadows, into the deep forest where the black robes could not follow. The curanderos, stripped of their visible power, became masters of camouflage. They realized that to survive, they had to adapt. They could not fight the iron cross with a wooden spear. They had to absorb the cross, to swallow it, just as the vine swallows a tree. And so, a strange and powerful syncretism began to take root in the cultural soil of the Amazon. It was a slow, deliberate blending of the old and the new, a survival strategy that would forever change the face of ayahuasca. The indigenous people looked at the symbols of the invaders and found ways to map them onto their own cosmology. They looked at the Virgin Mary, the mother of the Christian God. They saw a woman, revered, holy, associated with the miracle of life. "We know her," they whispered. "She is the Pachamama. She is the mother of the forest. She is the queen of the plants. And so, in the secret ceremonies held under the cover of night, the Virgin Mary began to appear in the visions. But she was not the pale porcelain statue of the church. She was a dark-skinned jungle Madonna surrounded by jaguars and vines, wearing a cloak made of butterfly wings. They looked at Jesus Christ. They saw a man who healed the sick, who walked on water, who died and came back to life. This is a great shaman, they decided. He is a master of the little death. And so, Jesus was invited into the circle. The Icaros began to change. The old melodies remained, the ancient vibrations that unlocked the gates of the mind. But the lyrics began to weave in the names of the Christian pantheon. Dr. Jesus, they sang, Medicine of St. Peter. This was not a surrender, it was a subversion. By dressing their ancient gods in the clothes of the new saints, the indigenous people hid the truth in plain sight. When the priest asked, "Who are you praying to?" they could answer, "To Saint Anthony," and the priest would be satisfied. But in their hearts and in the visions, Saint Anthony was just a mask for the spirit of the anteater, or the guardian of the path. The cross itself, the symbol of Roman torture and redemption, was reinterpreted. In the geometry of the Ayahuasca vision, the cross is a fundamental shape. It represents the four cardinal directions: north, south, east, west. It represents the intersection of the vertical axis, spirit, and the horizontal axis, matter. When the missionaries planted the cross in the village square, the shamans nodded. Yes, they thought, we know this sign. It is the sign of the four winds. The cross and the vine became intertwined, literally and metaphorically. As the decades turned into centuries, the rigid grip of the Jesuit missions began to loosen. The Spanish and Portuguese crowns expelled the Jesuits in the mid-18th century, fearing their growing political power. The black robes departed, leaving behind their stone churches and their iron bells. And then, the forest began its slow, inevitable reclamation. Picture the ruins of a mission church in the deep Amazon today. The roof has long since collapsed, the timbers rotted by the humidity and eaten by termites. The stone walls, once whitewashed and pristine, are now covered in a thick velvet of moss and lichen. And growing out of the altar, cracking the stone with the slow hydraulic pressure of life, is a tree. And winding around that tree, thick and triumphant, is the vine. The green cathedral proved to be older and stronger than any temple built by human hands. The forest does not fight, it simply outlasts. It swallows the stone, the iron, and the dogma. It digests history and turns it into compost for new life. However, the legacy of this collision remains. The ayahuasca practiced today in the mestizo communities of the Amazon is deeply flavored by this colonial encounter. It is a folk Catholicism, a hybrid spirituality where the shaman might start the ceremony with the Our Father prayer before blowing tobacco smoke on the participants. The duality of God versus devil, introduced by the missionaries, seeped into the practice, creating a new emphasis on spiritual warfare, on fighting demons and bad airs. The innocence of the primordial garden was lost, replaced by a more complex, battle-scarred landscape where the cross and the vine are forever locked in a lover's embrace. We must also consider the psychological impact of this era on the soul of the medicine itself. If we treat the plant as a conscious entity, as the indigenous elders do, then we must ask, how did the vine react to being demonized? How does a spirit react to being called the devil? Some say the medicine became sterner, harder. The biography of the vine in this chapter is a story of trauma and survival. It learned to work in the shadows. It learned to be secretive. It learned to heal the wounds of colonization, the alcoholism, the loss of identity, the shame that the colonizers themselves brought. It became a medicine for the broken-hearted, for the displaced, for those who had lost their connection to the earth. The missionaries intended to bring the people to God. In a strange, ironic twist, they succeeded, but not in the way they imagined. They tried to force the people to look up at the sky to find the divine. But the people kept looking down, at the roots, at the mud, at the vine. And there, in the darkness of the ceremony, amidst the retching and the terror that the priests so feared, they found a direct experiential connection to the sacred that no sermon could ever provide. The veil had been pierced, yes, the innocence was gone, but the vine survived. It waited in the dark, winding its way through the ruins of the missions, holding the secrets of the ancestors in its woody fibers, waiting for the next chapter of history to unfold. It waited for a time when the world would be sick enough and lost enough to come back to the forest, not to conquer it, but to learn from it once again. As we visualize this era of conflict, let us imagine a single scene to hold in our minds. It is a moonlit night in the year 1650. In the center of a clearing stands a wooden cross, stark and angular against the chaotic backdrop of the jungle. At the foot of the cross, hidden in the shadows, a small vine has begun to grow. It sends out a tendril, delicate and green. It touches the wood of the cross. It curls around it. Slowly, silently, year by year, the vine climbs the cross. It does not destroy it. It embraces it. It covers the rigid angles with soft curves. It blooms with pink flowers. In the end, you cannot tell where the cross ends and the vine begins. They have become one. This is the history of the Amazon. It is not a story of purity, but of mixture. It is a story of how the sacred survives by transforming, by absorbing the foreign and making it familiar. The crosses cast upon the canopy did not conquer the forest. They became part of its trellis, just another structure for the life force to climb upon in its endless journey toward the light. The black robes have gone. The Latin chants have faded into the wind. But the Icaros remain, sung now with a mixture of indigenous dialects and Spanish words, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unyielding power of the vine. The devil's witchcraft is now recognized by the descendants of those very missionaries as a national cultural heritage. Time, like the river, has a way of bending back on itself, correcting the errors of perception and revealing the truth that was there all along. That the earth is holy, and the keys to its mysteries grow right out of the ground beneath our feet. The 19th century arrived in the Amazon, not with the slow, creeping moss of time, but with the screech of steam whistles and the clatter of industrial machinery. Far to the north, in the gray, smoke-choked cities of Europe and North America, a revolution was taking place. The wheel of progress was turning, and it demanded a new kind of fuel. It did not crave coal or oil, but something softer, more pliable, something that could cushion the ride of the bicycle, seal the valves of the steam engine, and later, tread the tires of the automobile. The world had developed an insatiable hunger for rubber, and the Amazon, in its infinite biological generosity, held the monopoly. This era brought a darkness deeper than the shade of the jungle floor. It was the era of the rubber boom, a period of economic explosion that cast a long, terrifying shadow over the rainforest. To the financiers in London and New York, rubber was black gold, a commodity as precious as bullion. But to the indigenous people of the basin, it was a curse that would bring about a holocaust of their nations. Picture the transformation of the river. For millennia, the Amazon had known only the paddle of the canoe and the drift of the raft. Now, the water was churned by the iron propellers of steamships. They arrived in armadas, pushing upriver from the Atlantic, their smokestacks belching black soot into the pristine canopy. They carried men of a different breed than the Jesuits. These were not men of God, seeking to save souls for heaven. They were men of commerce, seeking to extract value for the bank. They were the rubber barons, men of immense ambition and often immense cruelty, who saw the forest not as a temple but as a warehouse to be looted. The object of their desire was Hevea brasiliensis, the rubber tree. It is a stately, smooth-barked giant that grows scattered throughout the forest, never in clumps, but solitary, standing like a lonely sentinel in the green crowd. To extract its wealth, one must wound it. Imagine the act of tapping. The seringuero, or rubber tapper, approaches the tree in the damp gloom of the early morning. With a sharp, hooked knife, he carves a diagonal gash into the bark. He must be careful too shallow, and the milk will not flow. Too deep, and he kills the tree. If done correctly, the tree responds to the wound by weeping. A white, milky latex bleeds from the cut, dripping slowly into a small tin cup attached to the trunk. It is a slow, agonizing harvest. The latex is the blood of the tree, its defense mechanism against injury. The rubber boom was an economy built entirely on the harvesting of tears. To feed the voracious appetite of the industrial North, the barons needed labor. But the Amazon is not a place of willing workers seeking a wage. It is a place of subsistence and freedom. And so, a brutal system was engineered. The debt-peonage system, which was often little more than slavery by another name. The indigenous tribes, the Huitoto, the Bora, the Andoke, and countless others, were hunted down like animals. Armed mercenaries stormed the Moluccas, burning the villages, capturing the men, and holding the women and children hostage to ensure compliance. The forest, once a sanctuary, became a prison without walls. The indigenous people were forced to walk the jungle trails for endless hours, tapping tree after tree, carrying heavy loads of latex back to the trading posts. If they failed to meet their quotas, the punishments were medieval in their cruelty. Floggings, mutilations, and executions were commonplace. The green hell described by the early explorers became a reality, not because of the snakes or the jaguars, but because of the men who wore suits of white linen. It was in this crucible of pain, in the sweating, terrified barracks of the rubber camps, that the history of ayahuasca underwent a profound transformation. Before the boom, the use of the vine was largely tribal. The Tucano had their way of cooking it. The Shipibo had theirs. The songs were specific to the lineage, the rituals guarded by the elders of the clan. The vine was a local anchor, tying a specific people to a specific patch of land. But the rubber boom shattered these boundaries. It acted as a violent blender, displacing entire populations and forcing them into the labor camps. A Huitoto man might find himself sleeping next to a Bora man, a Kokama woman next to a Ticuna. They were stripped of their lands, their dignity, and their freedom, but they could not be stripped of their spiritual technology. In the secrecy of the night, when the overseers were asleep or drunk on imported brandy, the captives would gather. They had no drums, for drums were forbidden. They had no ceremonial feathers, for those had been stolen or destroyed. But they had the forest. The vine grew wild around the camps. The chacruna leaves were plentiful in the undergrowth. They brewed the medicine in hidden pots, deep in the thickets, and they drank. For the enslaved tapper, ayahuasca became the ultimate mechanism of survival. It was not a recreational escape. It was a lifeline. When the physical body is in chains, the only place left to be free is the spirit. The vine allowed them to dissolve the walls of the barracks. It allowed them to leave their scarred, beaten bodies behind and fly back to their ancestral homes. In the visions, they could see their families, hunt in the old hunting grounds, and commune with the spirits of the river. They could reclaim the dignity that the whip had tried to steal. This mixing of tribes in the camps led to a cross-pollination of shamanic knowledge. A shaman from the upper river would share a secret ingredient with a healer from the lower river. A specific Icaro for healing snake bites would be traded for a song that summoned the protection of the jaguar. The rigid, tribal distinctions began to blur. A new pan-Amazonian shamanism was born, a hybrid style that incorporated elements from dozens of different cultures, forged in the fires of shared suffering. The medicine itself seemed to adapt to the times. The indigenous elders say that plants have intelligence, that they respond to the emotional environment. During the rubber boom, the ayahuasca grew darker. It absorbed the grief of the era. The visions became filled with images of heavy machinery, of metal, of guns and uniforms. The vine began to offer not just divination, but trauma therapy. It became a tool for knitting together the fragmented psyche of a people who were witnessing the end of their world. It was also during this diaspora of suffering that the vine began its migration to the city. As the rubber trade grew, small river outposts swelled into booming metropolises. Manaus in Brazil became the Paris of the tropics, a city of absurd opulence where rubber barons lit their cigars with banknotes and built a grand opera house in the middle of the jungle, importing Italian marble and Austrian crystal. Iquitos in Peru grew from a Jesuit mission into a chaotic port city, its docks piled high with balls of rubber. Many indigenous people, displaced from their destroyed villages or fleeing the violence of the camps, drifted into the shanty towns, the favelas that ringed these cities. They became the urban poor, the caboclos or ribereños. They cut their hair, wore Western clothes, and spoke broken Spanish or Portuguese. But they brought the vine with them. In the mud-floored huts on the edges of Iquitos, the curandero evolved into a new figure. He was no longer just a tribal elder, he was a neighborhood healer. He treated the ailments of the urban poor, not just physical parasites, but the spiritual parasites of poverty, alcoholism, and bad luck. He treated susto, fright, mal de ojo, evil eye, and the deep existential depression of a displaced people. This was the birth of vegetalismo, the mestizo shamanism that dominates the Amazon today. It is a syncretic practice, blending the deep botanical knowledge of the indigenous tribes with Catholic iconography and European esotericism. In these urban ceremonies, the shaman might invoke the doctor spirits of the hospitals, seeing the spirits of the plants dressed in surgical scrubs. The adaptability of the vine was on full display. It moved from the maloca to the slum without losing its power. It demonstrated that its roots were not just in the soil, but in the human need for healing. The rubber boom eventually collapsed as quickly as it had begun. In a supreme act of biopiracy, a British explorer named Henry Wickham smuggled thousands of hevea seeds out of Brazil in 1876. They were cultivated in Kew Gardens in London and then shipped to the British colonies in Malaysia. There, organized in neat, disease-free plantations, the trees produced rubber far more efficiently than the wild collection of the Amazon. By 1910, the Asian plantations flooded the market. The price of rubber crashed. The barons went bankrupt. The opera houses went dark. The steamships rusted on the riverbanks, their iron hulls swallowed by the vines. The Paris of the tropics began to crumble, the humidity peeling the gold leaf from the walls. The white men left, retreating back to the comforts of the north, leaving behind a scarred landscape and a decimated population. But the vine remained. It grew over the ruins of the rubber camps. It wrapped its tendrils around the rusting machinery, claiming it for the forest. And, in the hearts of the people, it held a new place. It was no longer just a link to the ancestors, it was a symbol of resistance. It was the one thing the invaders could not steal, the one thing they could not commodify or export. The tears of latex had dried up, but the brew continued to flow. The suffering of the 19th century had changed the DNA of the practice. It had made it tougher, more resilient, and more universal. The biography of the molecule now included a chapter on industrial horror, a dark initiation that prepared the medicine for its next great leap. For out of the slums of Iquitos and the fading glory of Manaus, a new sound was emerging. It was the sound of the urban Icaro, a melody that carried the memory of the forest but spoke to the pain of the modern world. The vine had survived the Jesuits. It had survived the rubber barons. It was ready for the 20th century. As you visualize this chapter of history, picture a rusty iron wheel, half buried in the mud of the riverbank. A Banisteriopsis vine has grown through the spokes, locking the wheel in place. The metal is cold and dead, a relic of a forgotten greed. But the vine is warm and alive, pulsing with sap. It is a testament to the ultimate victory of the organic over the mechanical. The forest remembers the pain, but it does not hold on to it. It transforms it, leaf by leaf, into new growth. The silence that fell over the Amazon following the collapse of the rubber boom was not the silence of peace. It was the heavy, breathless silence of exhaustion. The great steamships, once the noisy harbingers of commerce, now lay rotting in the mud banks of the Rio Negro, their iron hulls turning to flakes of orange rust, devoured by the humidity and the vines. The grand opera houses stood empty, their velvet seats collecting the dust of neglect. The black gold had turned to dross, and the international financiers had turned their hungry eyes elsewhere, leaving the forest to lick its wounds. It was in this vacuum of power, in the debris of a shattered economy, that a new kind of order began to emerge. It did not come from the government palaces in Rio de Janeiro, nor from the Vatican. It came, as all true Amazonian transformations do, from the forest floor, walking on 2 feet. The setting for this chapter is the state of Acre, a remote, contested territory on the far western edge of the Brazilian Amazon, bordering Peru and Bolivia. It is a land of deep jungle, winding rivers, and a history soaked in the blood of territorial disputes. Into this wild frontier walked a man of immense stature, both physical and spiritual. His name was Raimundo Irineu Serra, but history would come to know him simply as Mestre Irineu. To understand the birth of the Forest Cathedral, we must first understand the architect. Irineu was a man of the African diaspora, born in 1892 in the state of Maranhão on the Brazilian coast. He was the grandson of slaves, carrying within his DNA the rhythmic memory of African spirituality and the resilience of a people who had survived the Middle Passage. Like thousands of other young men of his generation, he was drawn west by the promise of work in the rubber tapping industry. He traveled thousands of miles into the heart of the continent, a journey of epic proportions, moving from the open ocean to the claustrophobic density of the deep jungle. He arrived in Acre not as a conqueror, but as a laborer. He was a seringueiro, a rubber tapper, a man who spent his days in the solitary communion of the forest, walking the trails, wounding the trees, and collecting the milk. He was a man of the earth, towering over 6 feet tall, with hands calloused by the machete and eyes that held the quiet intensity of one who is comfortable in the dark. It was here, in the borderlands where the cultures of Brazil, Peru, and Bolivia bled into one another, that Irineu first encountered the brew. At that time, it was not called a sacrament. It was known as Ayahuasca by the indigenous tribes, or sometimes Tsipo among the mestizo workers. It was practiced in the shadows, associated with the Indian sorcery that the rubber barons and the priests despised. But Irineu, a man of open spirit, was invited by a Peruvian healer to drink. The details of those early sessions are shrouded in the mists of oral history, but the pivotal moment is etched in crystal clarity. It happened under the light of a full moon. Irineu, seeking healing and understanding, retreated into the forest. He drank the bitter tea. As the force, the borrachera, took hold, the forest dissolved. The trees became pillars of light. The sounds of the insects became a celestial choir. And then she appeared. He saw a woman of indescribable beauty and luminosity floating in the center of the moon. To the indigenous mind, this might have been the spirit of the moon or the anaconda mother. But Irineu was a man of the borderlands, a man of mixed heritage. In his vision, he identified this radiant entity as the Rainha da Floresta, the queen of the forest. He recognized her also as the Virgin of the Conception, the mother of Jesus. She did not speak to him in riddles. She gave him a clear, distinct directive, a mission that would consume the rest of his life. She told him that he was to be the vessel for a new doctrine. She told him that the tea, which she renamed Daime, meaning give me in Portuguese, as in give me light, give me love, was not a drug, but a holy sacrament. She commanded him to replant the vine, to organize a center, and to bring this medicine out of the chaotic, dark hut of the shaman and into the light of a structured, Christianized order. This was a radical departure from thousands of years of tradition. Until this moment, ayahuasca had been the domain of the lone shaman, operating in the dark, often engaging in spiritual warfare or sorcery. The queen of the forest was asking for something different. She was asking for a church. Imagine the courage required to execute this vision. Irineu was a black man in a racist society, a poor rubber tapper in a collapsed economy, handling a substance considered witchcraft by the authorities. Yet, he obeyed. He began a period of intense preparation, the dieta, eating only unsalted manioc and water for days, purifying his vessel to receive the hymns that would form the liturgy of his new faith. This is how the Santo Daime was born. Picture, if you will, the scene of one of these early works, trabalhos, in the deeper recesses of the Acrian forest. It is a scene of stark, almost jarring contrast to the tribal Maloka we visited in previous chapters. We are no longer in a dark, dirt-floored hut. We are in a salau, a large, hexagonal or rectangular hall, often open-walled to allow the breeze to flow, but roofed to protect from the rain. The space is illuminated. In the early days, it was by the glow of kerosene lamps, later by bright electric bulbs. The darkness, once the essential canvas for the visions, has been banished. In the theology of Mestre Irineu, the light is not something to be sought in the vision alone. It is something to be physically present. In the center of the room stands a table, the altar. It is shaped like a star, often a six-pointed Star of David, covered in a pristine white cloth. Upon it sits the cruzeiro, a two-armed cross, symbolizing the second coming of Christ in the form of the vine. There are candles, fresh flowers arranged with mathematical precision, and pictures of the Master and the Virgin. And then there are the people. They do not sit on the floor, they do not lie down on mats. They stand. They are arranged in rigid military lines, separated by gendermen on one side, women on the other, and organized by height and age. They are dressed not in loincloths or rags, but in uniforms, the farda. Visualize the visual impact of the farda. The men wear crisp white suits with navy blue ties, looking like sailors or soldiers of peace. The women wear white blouses, pleated skirts, and sashes of green and blue, with tiaras of tinsel and glitter upon their heads. They look like a choir of angels, or perhaps a royal court of the jungle. This uniform is crucial. It erases social distinction. In the line, the lawyer stands next to the bricklayer, the grandmother next to the teenager. Everyone is equal before the daime. The whiteness of the clothes symbolizes the hygiene of the soul, a stark rejection of the mud and blood aesthetic of the rubber camps. The ceremony begins. The leader, often holding a maraca tin shaker filled with seeds, sets the rhythm. Shh, 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 shh. It is a driving, marching beat. And then they sing. They do not whistle the abstract, winding icaros of the tribal shaman. They sing hymns. These are songs with lyrics in Portuguese, received by the mestre and his followers directly from the astral plane. They are simple, poetic, and profoundly theological. I am the light, they sing. I am the light that guides you. The entire congregation sings in unison, a wall of sound that rises up through the tin roof and into the canopy of the rainforest. The daime is served in glasses, consumed with the reverence of the Eucharist. But unlike the Catholic Mass, where the wafer is a symbol, here the sacrament is the engine of the experience. As the tea takes effect, the force descends. The room begins to vibrate. The geometric reality of the ayahuasca vision overlays the physical reality of the salon. The white uniforms of the brothers and sisters begin to glow with an inner luminescence. The tinsel on the women's crowns sparkles, refracting the light into rainbows. The altar seems to open up, becoming a portal to the celestial Jerusalem. But the discipline remains absolute. There is no rolling on the floor. There is no screaming. If a participant needs to purge, they leave the line discreetly, go to the healing house outside, vomit, wash their face, and return to their spot in the formation. The wild, serpentine energy of the Amazon has been tamed. It has been channeled into a grid of discipline and harmony. This was the genius of Mestre Irineu. He understood that for the vine to survive in the modern world, it needed a container. It needed a structure that the Western mind could respect. By framing the ayahuasca experience within a Christian context, by using the symbols of the cross, the hymn, and the uniform, he built a bridge between the indigenous soul of the plant and the colonial soul of the culture. He took the devil's brew and baptized it. He turned the witch's hut into the forest cathedral. The experience of a Santo Daime hinario, a hymn-singing work, is an ordeal of endurance. The participants may dance for 8, 10, or 12 hours straight. The dance is a simple, rhythmic two-step, a collective swaying that mimics the movement of the tides or the wind in the trees. It requires immense physical and spiritual stamina. To keep singing, to keep dancing, while the medicine is dismantling your ego, while the nausea is rising, while the visions are overwhelming. This is the battle. The uniform is the armor. The line is the trench. The hymn is the sword. As the movement grew, other figures emerged from the forest, following similar paths of syncretism. One such man was José Gabriel da Costa, known as Mestre Gabriel. Like Irineu, he was a rubber tapper who migrated from the drought-stricken northeast. In the depths of the jungle, near the border with Bolivia, he too drank the tea and received a mission. In 1961, Mestre Gabriel founded the União do Vegetal, UDV. If Santo Daime is the musical wing of the ayahuasca religions, UDV is the word wing. Mestre Gabriel organized his center not as a church with dancing, but as a session of concentration. Picture a UDV session. It is even more stripped down, more austere. The participants sit in chairs around a long table, dressed in simple uniforms, softened green shirts with white pants, the uniform of the forest servant. The lighting is soft. There is no dancing. There are no maracas. The focus is on the chamada, the call. The mestre da representação, drinks the tea, which they call hoasca, and guides the session through spoken word and recorded music. The atmosphere in a UDV session is calm, scholarly, almost like a philosophical symposium held in the astral plane. The mestre speaks of the King Solomon, of wisdom, of the moral conduct required to be a person of goodness. The chaotic visuals of the drug are secondary to the clarity of the mind. The goal is mental concentration, the ability to hold a steady thought amidst the turbulence of the force. These two movements, Santo Daime and UDV, along with a third, the Barquinha, formed the Ayahuasca religions of Brazil. They represented a profound sociological shift. The vine was no longer just for the healer, it was for the family. Children were baptized in the faith, weddings were celebrated with the brew, funerals were conducted with hymns of passage. The vine had woven itself into the very fabric of the community's life cycle. This structured approach served a crucial protective function. In the mid-20th century, as the Brazilian government began to crack down on narcotics, looking with suspicion at the hippie movements and the drug culture, the ayahuasca churches stood apart. When the police inspectors arrived at Mestre Irineu's community, expecting to find a den of debauchery, they found instead a model village. They found men who didn't drink alcohol, who worked hard in the fields, who treated their wives with respect. They found a community of impeccable order and cleanliness. The inspectors were baffled. "This is the work of the drug," they asked. "No," Irineu would reply with the quiet dignity of a king. "This is the work of the Daime." Because of this discipline, when the Brazilian Council of Narcotics eventually investigated the tea in the 1980s, they did not ban it. Instead, in a landmark decision that stunned the world, they legalized it for religious use. They recognized that in the hands of these churches, the hallucinogen was not a disruptor of society, but a cohesive glue. The vegetal union had successfully argued that the right to drink the tea was a fundamental human right, a freedom of the spirit. But let us return to the sensory experience of the forest cathedral. It is difficult to convey in words the power of 100 voices singing in unison under the influence of the vine. The sound is not just heard, it is felt. It vibrates in the chest, in the marrow of the bones. The hymns act as a collective carrier wave, lifting the entire group into a shared visionary state. In the tribal ceremony, the experience is often solitary. You are alone in the dark with your own demons and the shaman's song. In the Daime work, the experience is communal. You are part of a current, a flow of energy that moves through the line. If you falter, the person next to you holds you up, not with hands, but with their voice, with their presence. You are not just healing yourself, you are helping to heal the current, praying for the sick, for the world, for the forest. The imagery within the works reflects this Christian animist fusion. The Juramidam, the spiritual name of Mestre Irenaeus, seen as a being of light, a general of the divine army. The jaguar is still there, but now he walks beside Saint Michael the archangel. The snake is still there, but she is wrapped around the cross, transformed from a predator into a symbol of eternal life. The water spirits, the caboclos, dance alongside the seraphim. The hymns of the forest cathedral tell a story of redemption. They speak of a new era, a time when the secrets of the forest would be revealed to the world to help humanity find its way back to God. They speak of nature not as a resource to be exploited, but as a divine scripture to be read. As the night deepens in the salon, the physical world seems to become transparent. The roof of the church dissolves. The participants, swaying in their white uniforms, seem to be standing not on a concrete floor, but on the clouds. The force is high. The miração, vision, is crisp and clear. And in the center of it all, the spirit of Mestre Ireneu presides, a towering presence of benevolence and authority. He is the bridge builder. He is the one who took the chaotic, terrifying power of the jungle night and built a house for it. He took the vine of the dead and made it the vine of eternal life. By the time the sun begins to rise over the Acrean forest, the work is drawing to a close. The candles have burned down. The uniforms are rumpled, sweat-stained from the hours of dancing. The faces of the brothers and sisters are tired but radiant. They have fought the battle. They have navigated the astral storms. They have sung the hymns until their voices were hoarse. As they file out of the salon, stepping from the electric light back into the morning mist of the jungle, they carry something with them. It is not just the afterglow of a drug. It is the deep, cellular knowledge of order. They have seen the architecture of the divine, and it looks like a garden where every plant has a name, and every soul has a song. The vine had learned to speak a new language, Portuguese. It had learned to wear a tie and a skirt. It had learned to sing in major keys, and in doing so it had ensured its survival for the next century. It had planted itself in the modern world, not as a weed, but as the central pillar of a new, green Christianity. The forest cathedral was open for business, and its bells, the maracas, were ringing out a call that would soon be heard far beyond the borders of Brazil. In the middle of the 20th century, while the world was busily rebuilding itself from the ashes of the Second World War, a different kind of hunger began to stir in the belly of the West. It was an era of concrete and steel, of television sets flickering in living rooms, and of a desperate, manic drive toward a sterilized version of progress. The suburbs were spreading like a quiet fungus, offering comfort but demanding conformity. Yet, beneath the veneer of the American dream and the gray flannel suits of the new corporate order, there was a vibration, a restless frequency that could not be tuned out. It was a time of spiritual dryness. The old gods seemed dead, buried under the rubble of Hiroshima and Auschwitz. The new god was the atom, cold and indifferent. But in the smoky jazz clubs of New York, the cafes of Paris, and the lecture halls of Harvard, whispers began to drift northward like spores carried on a southern wind. They were rumors of a telepathic drug, a green gold hidden in the deepest recesses of the Amazon basin. They spoke of a vine called yahe, pronounced yahe, a mysterious botanical key that could unlock the secrets of the mind and facilitate direct communication with the divine, or perhaps with the dead. To understand how the vine began its migration into the modern imagination, we must look away from the jungle for a moment and gaze into the cluttered, chaotic apartments of the Beat generation. These were the poets, the drifters, and the visionaries who felt the crushing weight of materialism and rejected it with a howl. They were looking for the new vision, a way to break through the sanitized crust of Western society and touch the raw nerve of existence. Foremost among these seekers was William S. Burroughs. Imagine him, if you will, not as a shaman in feathers, but as a gaunt, spectral figure in a trench coat, his face a mask of cynical exhaustion. He was a man fleeing his own demons, addiction, legal troubles, and the accidental shooting of his wife. He was not looking for enlightenment in the traditional sense. He was looking for the final fix. He had heard rumors that the witch doctors of the Putumayo region possessed a drug that induced telepathy. To a man obsessed with control and the breaking of control, this was the ultimate grail. In 1953, Burroughs embarked on a journey that would become legendary. He traveled to Colombia, a country then in the grip of La Violencia, a brutal civil war. Picture the atmosphere of Bogotá in the rain. Gray, ominous, filled with men in dark suits and the smell of wet wool and fear. Burroughs moved through this landscape like a ghost, a junkie conquistador armed not with a sword but with a typewriter and a voracious curiosity. He ventured over the Andes and down into the steaming lowlands of the Putumayo. His letters to his friend, the poet Allen Ginsberg, chronicle this descent. They are not the flowery, reverent descriptions of the nature poets. They are gritty, noir snapshots of a man out of place. He describes the heat that sticks to the skin like oil, the clouds of mosquitoes, the rotting hotels with peeling paint, and the overwhelming sense of biological menace. When Burroughs finally found a brujo, sorcerer, willing to give him the yahe, he did not find immediate salvation. He found terror. He described the taste of the brew as oily and phosphorescent, a liquid that seemed to be alive as it slid down the throat. He wrote of a blue flash, a sudden, violent tearing of the sensory veil. He did not see angels. He saw cities made of composite organic matter, grotesque hybrids of machinery and flesh. He felt the motion of the vine, a twisting, nausea-inducing vertigo that stripped him of his ego and left him shivering on the dirt floor of a hut. Yahe is not like marijuana or other drugs, he wrote. It is a drug of the most absolute panic. And yet, despite the horror, or perhaps because of it, Burroughs was captivated. He sensed that he had touched something ancient and non-human. He believed he had found a tool that could scramble the programming of the conditioned mind. His writings, later collected as the Yahe Letters, became a counterculture Bible. They cast the vine in a new light, dark, dangerous, exotic, and profoundly transformative. He stripped away the romanticism and presented the experience as a metaphysical surgery, a brutal ordeal that was necessary to escape the control system of modern life. Following in his footsteps, though with a very different heart, was Allen Ginsberg. If Burroughs was the cynical scientist of the soul, Ginsberg was the mystic, the yearning child seeking the embrace of the universe. 7 years after Burroughs, Ginsberg made his own pilgrimage to Pucallpa, Peru. Picture the contrast. Ginsberg, with his thick glasses and his open, vulnerable face, sitting in a mosquito-netted room, sweating in the tropical night. He approached the vine with a desperate hope for love, for a connection to the great being. But the vine, as we have seen, is a mirror. It reflects what is inside, amplified 1,000 times. Ginsberg's experience was cataclysmic. He drank the brew and was confronted with the terrifying reality of his own mortality. He felt his consciousness being severed from his body. He saw the great vagina of the universe waiting to swallow him. He wrote of being a serpent vomiting out the universe. It was a confrontation with the great fear, the existential dread that lies at the bottom of the human soul. I felt faced by death, he wrote. This is what I have come here for. This is the end of the line. But in that terror, Ginsberg found a kernel of profound truth. He realized that the visions, the colors, and the telepathy were secondary. The only thing that mattered was love. The vine stripped him of his intellectual pretensions and left him naked, realizing that his mission was to return to the world and love it, despite its horror. The correspondence between these two men, Burroughs, the cold analyst, and Ginsberg, the hot mystic, created a mythology. To the youth of the 1960s, reading these letters in dorm rooms and coffee shops, the Amazon became a place of destiny. It was no longer just a geographical location, it was a psychic destination. The beat of a different drum was calling them away from the assembly lines and the office cubicles, inviting them to drink the bitter tea and see the world with new eyes. But while the poets were vomiting and typing in the river towns, another narrative was unfolding deep in the primary forestone of quiet observation and rigorous science. While the beats were screaming their discoveries to the world, a man named Richard Evans Schultes was whispering to the plants. Schultes is a figure who seems to have stepped out of a Victorian adventure novel. A Harvard-educated botanist, he arrived in the Amazon in 1941, originally on a mission to find sources of wild rubber for the war effort during World War II. But when the war ended, Schultes did not go home. He disappeared. For 12 consecutive years, Schultes lived in the Amazon. He did not live in the hotels of Manaus or Iquitos. He lived in the canoe. He lived in the maloca. He lived in the hammock. He traveled where no white man had ever gone, navigating the treacherous rapids of the Apaporis and the Vaupés rivers. He traded his heavy Western clothes for the light cotton garb of the indigenous people, often traveling barefoot to better feel the jungle floor. Schultes was not a thrill-seeker. He was a scientist of the highest order, a man of immense patience and stoicism. Picture him sitting in a dugout canoe, a pith helmet on his head, one of the few concessions to his Western identity, a notebook in his lap. He is surrounded by a wall of green so dense it looks like a solid fortification. He is not looking for a fix. He is looking for taxonomy. He is looking for the names of things. Schultes understood something that his contemporaries in the universities ignored, that the indigenous peoples were not savages, but colleagues. He realized that the Amazon was a vast, living university, and the shamans were its professors. He approached them with humility. He did not preach. He listened. He watched how they harvested the bark. He watched how they scraped it. He noted the precise temperature of the water. He spent years in the Sibundoy Valley of Colombia, a place known as the Valley of Hallucinations. This high-altitude valley, shrouded in perpetual mist and surrounded by volcanoes, was home to the Kamsa and Inga peoples, tribes with a uniquely intense relationship with psychoactive plants. Here, Schultes befriended the great payés, healers, men like Salvador Chindoy, whose faces were etched with the history of the Andes. Schultes documented the use of ayahuasca, which he often referred to by its Colombian name, yahe, with the precision of a chemist. He identified the admixture plants. He realized that the magic was not just in the vine, but in the specific combination of the vine and the leaf. He collected thousands of specimens, drying them in the sun or over fires, pressing them between sheets of newspaper to be sent back to the herbarium at Harvard. But Schultes did something more important than collecting dried leaves. He collected the context. He understood that the pharmacological effect of the plant could not be separated from the ritual container. He noted that the intoxication was, in fact, a doorway to a sophisticated system of conflict resolution, ecological management, and medical diagnosis. He saw the payé not as a mystic, but as a doctor with a different toolkit. There is a famous photograph of Schultes from this era. He is sitting on a rock in the middle of a river, examining a plant. He looks utterly at peace, a man who has found his place in the world. He is miles from civilization, surrounded by dangers that would terrify a normal man-jaguars, venomous snakes, tropical diseases. Yet, his expression is one of calm, focused wonder. Schultes' approach was the yang to the beat's yin. Where Burroughs and Ginsberg were subjective, emotional, and chaotic, Schultes was objective, analytical, and orderly. They were the fire, he was the earth. They brought the myth, he brought the data. Yet Schultes was not immune to the power of the vine. He drank it many times, not for recreation, but to understand its effects on the human organism. His descriptions are far more restrained than those of the poets, but no less powerful. He wrote of grotesquely colored masks, of blue mists, and of a supreme state of awareness. He noted that under the influence of the vine, the jungle took on a terrifying clarity, as if the observer could see the very veins of the leaves from 100 yards away. He also corrected the early scientific errors. In the 19th century, the active alkaloid in the vine had been named telepathine by scientists who were influenced by the rumors of mind reading. Schultes, through his chemical analysis, helped confirm that the compound was actually harmine, identical to a chemical found in the Syrian rue seeds of the Middle East. He grounded the magic in molecular reality without stripping it of its mystery. These two parallel narratives, the wild, artistic experimentation of the beats and the rigorous, respectful study of the ethnobotanists, began to converge in the 1960s and 70s. They acted as a pincer movement on the Western consciousness. The poets opened the heart of the counterculture, making the Amazon seem like a place of romantic rebellion and spiritual possibility. The scientist gave the movement legitimacy, proving that these plants were not just jungle juice, but botanical marvels worthy of serious study. Schultes eventually returned to Harvard, where he became a legendary professor. His classroom was a portal to the Amazon. He would stand at the lectern, holding a blowgun or a dried vine, and transport his students to the Sibundoy Valley. Among his students were men like Timothy Leary and Wade Davis, who would go on to carry the torch of psychedelic research into the future. Schultes was the bridge between the Victorian era of exploration and the modern era of psychedelic science. Because of these men, the green wall of the Amazon began to look less like a barrier and more like a door. The West began to look at the rainforest not just as a resource to be exploited for rubber or timber, but as a repository of ancient wisdom that the modern mind had forgotten. Imagine the cultural shift that was taking place. For centuries, the flow of information had been one way, the West bringing civilization to the Amazon. Now, the current was reversing. The Amazon was sending its technology to the West. The vine was reaching out, using the typewriter of Burroughs and the plant press of Schultes as its vehicles. The beat of a different drum was no longer a distant echo. It was growing louder. It was the sound of a culture waking up to the realization that it had severed its connection to the earth, and that the cure for its spiritual malaise might be found in the mud of the jungle. The rumors of the telepathic drug had turned into something more tangible. It was no longer a ghost story, it was a botanical fact. And as the psychedelic revolution of the 1960s exploded in a riot of tie-dye and rock and roll, the quiet brown vine of the Amazon waited in the wings, ready for its close-up. It had survived the Jesuits. It had survived the rubber barons. Now, it prepared to meet the children of Aquarius. But before we move to the global expansion, let us linger for a moment in the 1950s. Let us picture two men. One is William S. Burroughs, pale and shaking, sitting in a cheap hotel room in Panama, typing a letter about a blue flash that ripped the sky open. The other is Richard Evans Schultes, tanned and calm, sitting in a canoe on the Vaupés River, pressing a leaf into a book. They are worlds apart, yet they are doing the same work. They are the cartographers of the invisible. They are the scouts who went ahead into the darkness and brought back fire. They are the reason why today we can speak of ayahuasca not as a savage superstition, but as the vine of the soul. The drumbeat continues. It moves from the page to the laboratory, from the poem to the peer-reviewed paper. The secret is out. The great anaconda has begun to slither north, and the world will never be the same again. In the silence that follows their footsteps, we can hear the forest breathing. It is a breath of relief, perhaps. For the first time in history, the invaders are not coming to take. They are coming to learn. The plants are ready to teach, but the lesson is not easy. As Burroughs warned, and as Schultes knew, the vine demands a price. It demands the surrender of the ego. And for a civilization built on the supremacy of the self, that is the most terrifying price of all. The stage is set. The actors are in place. The curtain is about to rise on the global stage. The vine is stretching its tendrils across the ocean, seeking new soil, new minds, and new souls to entangle in its ancient green embrace. As the wheel of history turned and the calendar clicked over into a new millennium, the world underwent a contraction. The vast distances that had once separated the continents, distances measured in months of sea travel or weeks of trekking, evaporated. The globe became a village, wired together by the invisible filaments of the internet and the flight paths of jetliners. And in this shrinking world, the vine grew longer. It stretched its tendrils across the oceans, ignoring borders, bypassing customs, and winding its way into the heart of the very civilization that had once tried to destroy it. The Ayahuasca Renaissance had begun. This chapter of the biography of the vine does not begin in a maloca, but in an airport terminal. Picture, if you will, a suitcase moving along a conveyor belt. Inside, wrapped in layers of dirty laundry and plastic bags, is a repurposed soda bottle filled with a thick, brown sludge. It looks like mud, or perhaps old engine oil. It is unassuming. Yet this bottle contains the concentrated soul of the Amazon. It is traveling from the humid heat of Iquitos to the cold, gray pavement of New York City, or London, or Berlin. The vine has become a traveler. No longer confined to the river basins where the jaguar prowls, the brew found new homes in the most unlikely of places. It arrived in the loft apartments of Brooklyn, where the sound of the ceremony competed with the sirens of police cars outside. It arrived in the pristine yoga studios of Los Angeles, where the smell of burning sage mingled with the scent of expensive perfume. It arrived in the stone farmhouses of Ibiza and the high-rise condos of Tokyo. The ceremony adapted to these new containers. The urban shaman emerged, sometimes a trained apprentice of the jungle masters, sometimes a well-meaning enthusiast with a Spotify playlist and a bag of feathers. The participants were no longer the caboclos seeking a cure for snakebite or a good harvest. They were the children of the industrial age, advertising executives, software engineers, artists, and investment bankers. They lay on yoga mats instead of dirt floors. They vomited into plastic buckets instead of the earth. But why? What drove this mass migration of the soul? To understand the expansion, we must look at the sickness. The modern West, for all its material wealth and technological wizardry, was suffering from a plague. It was not a plague of the body, like smallpox or cholera, but a plague of the spirit. It was a gray plague of depression, anxiety, addiction, and a profound, hollow emptiness. We had conquered the world, but we had lost ourselves. We had access to infinite information, yet we felt starved for wisdom. We had pills to wake us up, pills to put us to sleep, and pills to numb the pain of being alive. Yet the pain persisted, a dull ache in the center of the chest. The seekers who flocked to the vine were refugees from this crisis of meaning. They were spiritual tourists, a term often used with derision, but which speaks to a genuine and desperate hunger. They were looking for a connection they could not find in the therapist's chair or the confessional booth. They were looking for a direct experience of the sacred, something that would shake them out of the numbness of their daily lives. They wanted to feel, even if what they felt was terror. As the plastic bottles traveled north, the people traveled south. A reverse migration began. The dusty river city of Iquitos, Peru, once the capital of the rubber boom, transformed into the capital of the ayahuasca boom. Picture the arrival of a flight into Iquitos. The doors of the plane open, and the passengers are hit by the wall of tropical heat. They step onto the tarmac pale, nervous, carrying backpacks filled with mosquito repellent and journals. They are met by a chaotic swarm of motocados, the three-wheeled rickshaws that buzz through the streets like angry hornets. They are whisked away, not to hotels, but to lodges. These lodges sprang up along the rivers like mushrooms after a rain. Some were humble, run by local families who had practiced the medicine for generations. Others were luxurious healing centers owned by foreigners, offering filtered water, organic food, and psychological integration support. The jungle, once a place of survival, became a spa for the soul. The Gringo Trail became a pilgrimage route. In the markets of Belen, amidst the hanging carcasses of caiman and the piles of medicinal bark, tourists haggled for charms and potions. In the cafes, strangers bonded over stories of their purge, sharing the intimate details of their visions as if they were discussing the weather. Did you see the jaguar? Did you see the mother? The vocabulary of the Amazon had entered the global lexicon. This explosion of interest brought the vine under the cold, scrutinizing eye of modern science. For decades, ayahuasca had been dismissed by the medical establishment as a mere hallucinogen, a generator of delusions. But as the stories of miraculous recoveries from heroin addiction, severe PTSD, and treatment-resistant depression began to pile up, science could no longer look away. The 21st century brought a new tool to the study of the ancient brew, the fMRI machine. Picture the scene a stark contrast to the firelit Maloka. A volunteer, perhaps an experienced drinker, lies on a sterile table. They are slid into the narrow, humming cylinder of the magnet. They have consumed the brew. There are no icaros here, only the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the magnetic coils. As the medicine takes hold, the neuroscientists watch the monitors. They see the brain light up. They observe a phenomenon that bridges the gap between the mythological and the molecular. They see the default mode network, DMN, go dark. The default mode network is a group of interacting brain regions that is active when we are not focused on the outside world. It is the seat of the autobiography. It is the narrator in your head that says, I am John, I am anxious, I am a failure, I need this, I hate that. It is the biological address of the ego. In the depressed brain, the DMN is hyperactive, trapped in a loop of negative self-reference, like a broken record playing a sad song over and over again. Under the influence of ayahuasca, the blood flow to this network is drastically reduced. The governor is taken offline. The rigid boundaries of the self dissolve. At the same time, the brain becomes hyper-connected. Areas that normally do not speak to each other, the visual cortex, the memory centers, the emotional processing units, begin to communicate in a chaotic, vibrant symphony. The scientists watched in awe as the brain entered a state of entropy, a state of fluidity that resembles the brain of a child. They realized that the death the shaman spoke of was the death of the rigid ego. The rebirth was the rewiring of the neural pathways. The medicine was not just showing the patient a pretty picture, it was physically remodeling the architecture of their mind, melting the snow of old habits so that new sled tracks could be formed. The snake designs of the visions were revealed to be consistent with the entoptic phenomena produced by the stimulation of the visual cortex. The purge was understood as a somatic release of stored trauma. Science began to catch up with mythology, translating the poetry of the forest into the prose of the laboratory. The vine of the soul became a psychoplastogen, a compound capable of growing new neurons. But this global expansion was not without its shadows. As with the rubber boom centuries before, the commodification of the Amazon brought with it a darkness. The sacred vine became an industry. The economics of enlightenment are tricky. In the traditional context, the curandero was a community servant, paid in chickens, tobacco, or small amounts of money. Now, retreats were charging thousands of dollars for a week of ceremonies. This influx of cash created a gold rush mentality. Unqualified guides, seeing an opportunity for easy profit, donned the white robes and the feathers. They learned a few songs from a CD, bought some brew from the market, and declared themselves shamans. These neo-shamans, or plastic shamans, lacked the years of terrifying isolation and strict dieting that are required to master the energy of the ceremony. They were playing with fire without a fire extinguisher. Stories of bad trips began to surface. Participants left alone in the dark, screaming in terror without a guide to anchor them. Sexual abuse scandals rocked the community as predatory individuals used the vulnerability of the trance state to exploit the seekers. The intimacy of the ritual was sometimes replaced by a crowded, chaotic hall where 50 people purged at once, the delicate thread of the Icaro lost in the noise. And the forest itself felt the strain. Banisteriopsis caapi is a fast-growing vine, but it is not infinite. To make the brew, you must harvest the woody stem, which kills the plant. Chacruna leaves must be gathered in massive quantities. As the demand from the hungry north increased, wild harvesting intensified. The vineros had to travel deeper and deeper into the jungle to find mature vines. Reports of vine rustling, the theft of ayahuasca from protected reserves, became common. The very medicine that was teaching the world to respect nature was being threatened by the world's inability to respect limits. It was a time of profound tension between the sacred and the profane. The spirit of the plant was trying to maintain its integrity amidst the noise of the marketplace. It was being branded, marketed, and sold like a vacation package. Ayahuasca tourism became a buzzword, appearing in travel magazines alongside tips for the best ceviche. Yet, despite the chaos, despite the charlatans and the shortages, the miracles continued. The vine is resilient. It has a way of working around the human ego, even the ego of a bad shaman. The seekers who came with open hearts still found what they were looking for. They found that plastic bottle brew in the Brooklyn loft still carried the frequency of the forest. They found that even in a crowded lodge, the inner voice of the mother could still be heard. The cultural exchange was not entirely one-sided. The influx of foreign money, while problematic, also revitalized the tradition. Young indigenous people who had previously looked down on shamanism as backward or savage saw the respect and the income that the curanderos commanded. They began to return to the old ways. They asked their grandfathers to teach them the songs. The lineage, which had been in danger of dying out, was given a new lease on life. The vine was weaving a new tapestry, one that included the gray skyscrapers of New York and the green canopy of the Amazon. It was creating a global village of the initiated. People who had drunk the brew returned to their high-stress lives with a secret knowledge. They were the mycelium spreading through the cracks of the concrete, slowly changing the culture from the inside out. Imagine a banker in London who, after a weekend ceremony, decides to quit his job and start a non-profit. Imagine a soldier in Texas who, after drinking in a lodge in Peru, finally finds peace from the nightmares of war. Imagine a scientist in Zurich who looks through her microscope and sees not just cells, but the sacred geometry of the divine. This is the work of the vine in the 21st century. It is an operator. It is a diplomat. It is using the very mechanisms of globalization, air travel, the internet, capitalism, to spread its message of interconnection. It is a Trojan horse made of wood and leaf, entering the fortress of the Western mind to dismantle the walls of separation. As we stand in this era of expansion, we must look at the duality with clear eyes. We see the miracle of healing and the mess of commerce. We see the sacred tears and the tourist dollars. We see the brain lighting up in the scanner and the forest being cut down. The vine teaches us that nothing is pure. The lotus grows from the mud. The medicine tastes of bile. The journey to the light leads through the darkness. The ayahuasca renaissance is messy, chaotic, and beautiful. It is a desperate attempt by the human species to medicate itself before it is too late. And the vine? The vine just grows. It grows in the greenhouse in Hawaii. It grows in the pot in the California living room. It grows in the heart of the Amazon. It waits for the water to boil. It waits for the song to begin. It waits to show us, once again, who we truly are. The ocean has been crossed. The secret is global. The great anaconda has wrapped her body around the world, squeezing us, not to kill us, but to wake us up. And now we stand at the precipice of the present, looking back across the vast, undulating ocean of time. We stand on the edge of the clearing, gazing into the dense, impenetrable wall of green that stretches from the foothills of the Andes to the mouth of the Atlantic. We have journeyed through the mists of the primordial dawn, where the great anaconda carved the rivers with her belly. We have sat by the fires of the first curanderos as they discovered the alchemical wedding of leaf and vine. We have witnessed the collision of worlds as the cross met the canopy, and we have wept with the tappers in the dark barracks of the rubber boom. We have seen the vine travel from the Maloca to the cathedral, and from the river port to the laboratory scanner. The story of ayahuasca, as we have seen, is not merely the history of a drug, nor is it simply a botanical curiosity to be catalogued in a dusty textbook. It is the biography of a relationship. It is a love story fraught with tension, betrayal, and reconciliation between the human spirit and the natural world. It is the saga of a species that forgot its mother, and the patient, verdant intelligence that has waited thousands of years for the children to return home. Despite the turbulence of the centuries, despite the rubber barons with their whips, the missionaries with their matches, the tourists with their dollars, and the scientists with their calipers, the core of the experience remains untouched. The surface of the river may be churned by the engines of commerce and the storms of history, but the deep water, the cold, dark current that flows near the bottom, remains still. To find this stillness, we must look past the noise of the ayahuasca renaissance. We must look past the crowded lodges of Iquitos and the sleek wellness centers of the West. We must travel, in our minds, deeper into the primary forest, far beyond the reach of the cell towers and the flight paths. We must go where the map turns blank, to the headwaters where the water is clear and the trees are old enough to remember the silence before the arrival of steel. Here, deep in the lungs of the world, the old ways endure. The ceremony is not a commodity, it is a duty. It is not sold, it is given. The curandero here is not a celebrity, he is a humble servant of the community, a man whose hands are stained with the earth of his garden and the juice of the tobacco. He does not wear a white robe or a feather headdress to impress an audience. He wears his old t-shirt and his faded trousers, for the spirits do not care for costumes, they care for the heart. Picture the scene of this timeless ritual. It is identical to the scene played out 10,000 years ago. The Maloca is small, thatched with palm, open to the night air. The darkness is absolute, a velvet blindfold that removes the distraction of the visible world. The only light comes from the glowing tip of the mapacho, a single red eye in the blackness, moving as the shaman draws breath. The soundscape has not changed since the Pleistocene. The nocturnal insects still sing the chorus of the night, a deafening, metallic symphony of clicks, whirs, and buzzes. It is a wall of sound that surrounds the hut, a sonic shield that separates the sacred space from the chaos of the jungle. The frogs add their bass notes from the riverbank, a rhythmic thrumming that mimics the heartbeat of the earth. And occasionally, the scream of a jaguar or the cry of a night bird pierces the veil, a reminder that the forest is a place of predator and prey, of life and death dancing in the dark. Inside the hut, the curandero still whistles. He whistles the path home for the wandering soul. His melody is low and breathy, a sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. It is the thread of Ariadne, the lifeline thrown into the labyrinth of the vision. He calls upon the doctors of the forest, the spirit of the tobacco, the spirit of the water, the spirit of the vine. He does not command them, he invites them. He negotiates with the unseen forces on behalf of the sick, the lost, and the broken. This endurance of the core tradition teaches us a profound lesson about the nature of time. In the West, we are taught that history is a straight line, an arrow of progress shooting upward from the primitive to the modern, from the superstition of the past to the reason of the future. We believe that we are moving away from the forest, rising above our biological roots. But the vine teaches us that history is not a straight line, it is a circle. The shape of the ayahuasca vision is the mandala, the wheel, the coil of the snake. The vine grows in spirals. The seasons move in cycles. The water rises and falls. The indigenous wisdom holds that time is a great hoop, and that if you walk far enough into the future, you will eventually arrive at the past. We are currently living through the closing of one such great circle. For centuries, humanity has engaged in a project of separation. We separated ourselves from the land, moving into concrete boxes. We separated the mind from the body, treating the physical vessel as a machine to be driven. We separated the sacred from the profane, locking God in a church and leaving the rest of the world godless. We tried to dominate nature, to tame the wild, to extract the oil and the ore and the rubber until the earth groaned under the weight of our ambition. And now, at the height of our technological prowess, we find ourselves sick. We are lonely. We are anxious. We are spiritually starving in a supermarket of abundance. And so, we are turning back. We are turning back to the plants. We are turning back to the techniques of the archaic mind. The Renaissance is not a discovery of something new. It is a remembrance of something old. It is a return to the understanding that the earth is alive, that plants have agency, and that we are not the masters of this planet, but its guests. The vine acts as the mediator in this reconciliation. It is the diplomat sent by the vegetable kingdom to negotiate a peace treaty with the human kingdom. It brings a message that is both simple and terrifying. We are all one. When you drink the brew, you feel the sap of the tree in your own veins. You feel the breath of the jaguar in your own lungs. You realize that the destruction of the forest is the destruction of yourself. This is not an intellectual concept. It is a visceral, cellular reality. This realization requires a descent. In a culture that is obsessed with highs, with rising, with ascending, ayahuasca demands that we go down. It is a medicine of the underworld. It pulls us down into the roots, into the mud, into the shadows of our own psyche. It forces us to look at the things we have hidden, the trauma, the grief, the shame, the arrogance. It teaches us that healing does not come from bypassing the darkness, but from walking directly through it to find the light on the other side. The mother archetype that appears in the visions, whether as the anaconda, the Virgin Mary, or the Queen of the Forest, is the guide for this descent. She is not a coddling mother, she is a fierce mother. She is the mother who forces the bird out of the nest so it can learn to fly. She is the mother who scrubs the child clean, even if the water is cold and the soap is rough. She loves us enough to show us the truth, even when the truth is ugly. As we stand here, at the end of our narrative journey, we can see the unbroken circle stretching out before us. The ancient shaman in the rainforest and the modern seeker in the city are holding hands across the abyss of time. The smoke of the mapacho in the tribal hut mixes with the incense in the urban loft. The song of the Icaro harmonizes with the hum of the MRI machine. The vine has stitched the world back together. It is a fragile moment in history. The Amazon is burning. The machines are still eating the trees. The forces of greed are still hungry. But the vine has released its spores. The consciousness of the forest has escaped the containment of the jungle and has taken root in the minds of millions of people around the globe. It has created a mycelial network of awakened souls, people who have seen the blue flash, who have felt the hug of the serpent, and who are now working, in their own small ways, to protect the garden. The biography of ayahuasca is far from over. In fact, it may be just beginning. We are entering a new chapter, a chapter of synthesis, where the ancient wisdom of the earth meets the technological power of the sky. We are learning to be technicians of the sacred in a digital age. But let us leave the philosophy and the history for a moment. Let us return to the immediate sensory experience. Let us return to the quiet. The fire in the Maloka has burned down to a bed of soft, pulsing coals. The ceremony is closing. The curandero has finished his work. He sits quietly, smoking his pipe, his face illuminated by the faint orange glow. The participants are lying on their mats, wrapped in blankets, their bodies exhausted but their spirits light. The air is cool and damp, carrying the scent of rain on dry earth. As you drift into the quiet of your own rest, let the imagery of the vine fill your mind. Picture, if you will, the great Banisteriopsis vine in the heart of the Amazon. It is hundreds of years old. It is as thick as a man's torso. Its bark is rough and gnarled, covered in moss and epiphytes. It winds its way up the trunk of a massive ceiba tree, spiraling upward in a slow, sensual embrace. See the way it hugs the tree? It does not strangle it, it holds it. It is a lover's embrace that has lasted for centuries. The vine and the tree have grown together, their tissues pressing against each other, sharing water, sharing nutrients, sharing the vibration of the earth. The vine waits there, silent and patient. It does not rush. It does not worry about the passing of time. It has seen the seasons turn 1,000 times. It has felt the tread of the jaguar and the boot of the soldier. It holds the memories of the ancestors in its fibers, a library of woody scrolls written in the language of chemistry. It is a verdant thread connecting the human spirit to the heartbeat of the planet. Feel that connection now. Feel the invisible root growing from the base of your spine, reaching down through the floor, through the concrete, through the soil, down into the cool, dark earth. Feel it connecting with the vast network of roots that circle the globe. You are plugged in to the motherboard of the world. The forest is sleeping now. The birds have tucked their heads under their wings. The monkeys are huddled together in the branches. The great river flows silently toward the sea, a mirror of black glass reflecting the Milky Way above. The stars are bright and close, hanging like lanterns in the canopy of the cosmos. The candle is extinguished. A thin trail of smoke rises into the air, dancing for a moment before disappearing. The darkness is not empty. It is full. It is full of potential. It is full of dreams. It is the womb from which we came, and the home to which we return. The story is told. The circle is closed. The vine holds you. The earth holds you. Sleep now, eternal and awake, in the arms of the Mother.